Chapter 1097. Sensing that Feng Ling was taking a detour, the Mercedes-Benz behind her stopped following her and chose to turn to another route to avoid her counterattack. Feng Ling drove the car back to T University. After circling the neighborhood, she decided that she couldn't go back to Jin Wan's apartment or Miss Wen's residence for the time being. Otherwise, she would only cause trouble for them, so she just put the things she bought in the security room in front of the gate of T University and sent a message to Jin Wan, asking her to pick them up after she finished her work and to take them back to her dormitory. After giving these instructions, he drove away. Jin Wan hadn't seen Feng Ling in T University for about 2 days, nor did she receive a call from Feng Ling. Feng Ling was very cautious and would never be more than 5 meters away from her. But these 2 days, Feng Ling suddenly disappeared. Strange. When Mo Jingshan went to T-City again, he received a message from Li Nanheng and glanced at it. Nanheng, in T-City? Mo Jingshan replied with one word, yes. Nanheng, in that apartment or somewhere else? Mo Jingshan replied, apartment. Within half an hour, Nanheng drove over, knocked on the door and came in. Mo Jingshan saw that he was travel-worn. Obviously, he had driven across the province overnight. He looked cold and decadent. As soon as he entered the door, he went inside to find water to drink. Why are you in such a hurry? What's the matter? Li Nanheng put down the glass in his hand. Back then, when Feng Ling completed a mission at 11 base in the United States, she intercepted several smuggled military vehicles belonging to the New York Mafia. Those people have been tracking her whereabouts for the past 2 years, and in the past 2 days they have moved to T-City. Her whereabouts are currently being monitored. Mo Jingshan looked back. There are not many people in T-City. Have you transferred other people here? Yes. Feng Ling is good at martial arts. If she notices anything unusual, she should be prepared for it. Doesn't she know that you are here this time? I flew to High City overnight to transfer people and drove here from High City, but I haven't seen her yet. Li Nanheng took a look at the time when he sat down. Deal with Jin Wan's affairs by yourself. Feng Ling can't take care of herself. Take care of your wife. Don't let anything happen to her. No, it's fine as long as you're safe. They're all old grudges with 11 base. It's related to the arms deals in New York and Los Angeles. Their target is Feng Ling. It won't affect Jin Wan. Nanheng drove here overnight and did not sleep. He coughed with a cold expression and said, but for the next few days, you'd better not let Feng Ling follow Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan was silent for a moment before saying, the New York Mafia's vengeance has always targeted a specific person. With their abilities, they won't be able to cause trouble in the country. They won't dare to implicate more people in the country. As long as Feng Ling takes precautions and time, there won't be much of a problem. Li Nanheng knew that it was not a big problem, but after leaving her in China for so long, it was time to close the net. Be careful, Mo Jingshan said. Li Nanheng didn't say more. Now was the right time to send the group of people who had frequently set up obstacles in the United States to the next world. The shady business they had done over the years was enough for them to take revenge. When the time came, they should personally send them on their way. Feng Ling didn't go back for 2 days. After 2 days of chasing and secretly observing, she was completely sure of the background of the group of people who were following her. They were all the group of people who had been left behind. Here in China, the security was much stricter than in the United States, so it was not convenient to chase her on the road. Besides, T-City was not their territory, so they could only follow her for the time being and wait for an opportunity. After temporarily shaking off the group of people, Feng Ling, who had been outside for 2 days, had to go back to the place where she lived to take away some of her things, and she should move away from Miss Wen's place for the time being. She couldn't leave any of her things for these people to investigate. While the group of people was temporarily shaken off, Feng Ling drove to the community where Miss Wen and her lived some time ago, but she still carefully parked the car outside the community and then walked in through the side door alone. However, what Feng Ling didn't expect was that the group of people had already found her residence in T-City, and there were already 2 strong men waiting at the intersection she had to pass. As soon as she walked in, she suddenly saw the 2 men. Feng Ling stopped and took a step back calmly. Then she felt a chill on her back and looked back, only to see another strong man behind her, who seemed to have gotten out of the car parked not far away. Feng Ling glanced at the tall and strong men and the weapons in their hands. These people completely surrounded her in this alley. One of them was holding a long knife similar to the one used to cut watermelons in fruit stalls, and the other 2 were holding long black electric batons, approaching her step by step. In this kind of place they absolutely didn't dare to use guns. If the sound of gunshots caused the people nearby to become restless and really alarmed the domestic police, this group of people would not be able to continue to track her smoothly. Looking at the things in their hands, Feng Ling silently took a step back to the side of the gun, and at the moment the man behind her rushed over with the electric baton, she decisively and quickly raised her hand to hit the man's wrist. At the same time, with a quick and agile turn, she caught the man and pressed him to the ground. The man didn't expect that she was so powerful without a weapon in her hand. Wasn't it as rumored that this Feng Ling was only good at shooting? Her skills in close combat were so fast that the man couldn't guard against her, and the electric baton in his hand was instantly snatched away. Although Feng Ling's skills were good, the opponent was, after all, 3 strong men. The man who had just fallen to the ground took the opportunity to climb up. Just by waving his fist at her, it was enough to make her unable to deal with him. Furthermore, the other 2 had an electric baton and a knife. After several rounds of fighting, her arm was struck by the electric baton, and at the same time her shoulder was cut by the blade. Just as she was forced to lean against the wall, looking coldly for an opportunity to escape, one of the strong men she had just defeated rushed forward and grabbed her neck. He ruthlessly pushed her against the wall, his grip almost instantly breaking her neck. He cursed in American English, causing Feng Ling to furrow her brows. These people, as expected, were indeed the group from the mission in New York. At that time their accent was also like this. Outside the alley the black jeep sped over. It abruptly saw Feng Ling's car parked outside. At the same time, it saw several cars parked near her car. There was another car parked near the alley. It seemed like the people inside had been blocked. Li Nanheng glanced at the direction of the alley and drove around it. Old rules. Due to the large number of updates, it will take a day to correct the mistakes in the saved manuscripts and the saved chapters. Tomorrow I will stop updating for a day. See you the day after tomorrow. 2 consecutive days of updates should not be less than 80,000 words, starting to activate the warning of more sweet content. I love you guys, seeking monthly votes. Chapter 1098. Feng Ling kicked the brawny man in front of her away, freeing her neck that was almost about to be broken from the other party's grip. She turned to avoid the other party's hand that was about to grab her again. However, 3 people still came to attack her. In the narrow space of this alley, there was no place for her to hide. Both the electric baton and the long knife were too threatening. The fight did not stop. Both of her arms had been injured. Although it was not serious, there was blood dripping down her arms. When one of the men cursed because she had kicked his manhood, Gu Shizhou's eyes sharpened and she kicked him to the ground with a roundhouse kick. As he cursed and stood up, she was about to fight the other man with the stun baton, but the stun baton in his hand had already been switched on, and the sound of electric current could be heard in the air. With the intensity of the electric shock, if she was really electrocuted, half of her body would probably be numb for 2 days. In the confrontation, the man who had just been kicked down raised a knife and slashed down at her head. Feng Ling nimbly raised her head and grabbed his wrist. With a sharp twist, she heard the sound of his wrist dislocating. The foreign man, who was much taller than her, immediately screamed in pain. Feng Ling expressionlessly raised her foot and kicked him. "What are you doing?" Feng Ling asked. However, at this moment, another person got up, raised the electric baton, and stabbed it hard into her waist. Feng Ling immediately felt pain in half of her body. Even though she suddenly turned around to dodge and was about to fight back, her movements were still a little slow because of the electric shock. The man took the opportunity to kick her in the stomach. She bent down to avoid it, but the man suddenly grabbed her hair. All kinds of curses rang in her ears, and Feng Ling's scalp ached from being pulled. No matter how much strength she had used up a lot of her strength. She was trying to think of a way to retreat from this man's hand when she suddenly noticed a figure appearing at the entrance of the alley from the corner of her eye. Jinwan? Why did she come here alone instead of staying in T University? However, when she saw Jinwan clearly, she saw that Jinwan was holding a baseball bat that she didn't know where she got it from. She had long known that Mrs. Mo, who was weak, had a courage that even Feng Ling couldn't understand. Feng Ling didn't think about it anymore. She had to end it now. Feng Ling suddenly smiled at the 3 strong men in front of her. The corners of her mouth were stained with blood. In the dim alley, her smile was a little cold and cruel. When Feng Ling successfully attracted all the attention of the 2 men, suddenly, there were 3 bangs in the air. The 3 men were hit by a baseball bat on the back of their heads. Before they had time to turn their heads, they were knocked to the ground by the baseball bat. Before they could stand firmly, Feng Ling took the opportunity to stand up, subdued them, pressed them to the ground, and completely imprisoned them. "Thank you." After subduing the 3 men, Feng Ling ignored the blood on her body and turned her head to look at Jinwan, who was holding a baseball bat in her hand. Seeing that she was injured, Jinwan quickly stepped forward and checked the wounds and blood on her body with concern. Seeing that Feng Ling's cheeks seemed to be scratched, her neck was bruised, and the corners of her mouth were stained with blood, Jinwan reached out to take her arm. "How are you? Are you seriously injured?" "I'm fine. It's just a minor injury." Feng Ling didn't shake off Jinwan's hand but used her other hand to hit the back of the men's necks again. After being ruthlessly hit in the back of the neck, which was the weakest part, the three men immediately fainted and lay on the ground motionlessly. With Jinwan's support, Feng Ling stood up. Seeing that Feng Ling seemed to be injured and bleeding, Jinwan frowned. "What's the matter with them? Do you have any enemies in the United States?" "Enemies?" Feng Ling glanced at the three men on the ground. "Sort of. I did a lot of missions in 11 base and made a lot of enemies. You're seriously injured. Let's get out of here first." Jinwan tugged at her hand again. Although she was usually protected by Feng Ling, now seeing that Feng Ling was injured, she had no intention of staying out of this and must take Feng Ling away from this place. Feng Ling didn't have many women around her since she was a child. If she had to find a friend of the same sex, it would probably be Wen Liqing, but she was more grateful to Wen Liqing. Feng Ling didn't know Wen Liqing, but she was more grateful to Wen Liqing. Relatively speaking, Jinwan was definitely the weak one in front of Feng Ling. Jinwan didn't know how to fight or use a gun, but at this moment, the feeling of being suddenly protected by a woman made Feng Ling's heart inexplicably warm. Before she could say that she was fine, she had been forcibly taken out of the alley by Jinwan. However, just as the two of them ran out of the alley in the car parked in front of them, an accomplice of the same tall and strong group suddenly opened the door and got out of the car, holding the same black stun baton in his hand. He rushed at them with a fierce look and cursed rudely. "Watch out." At the moment when the man swung the stun baton, Jinwan and Feng Ling almost shouted at the same time. Before Jinwan tried to protect her behind her, Feng Ling subconsciously pulled Jinwan behind her. She didn't forget that she was Jinwan's bodyguard and couldn't let Jinwan suffer any harm because of her, but the pain in her arm couldn't be ignored. The pain and numbness from the electric shock were still there. She wanted to beat the man back, but her movements were still 2 or 3 seconds slower than usual. In these 2 or 3 seconds, the man successfully grasped the timing and was about to reach out his other hand to restrain her. Feng Ling used her remaining strength to temporarily push the man back, and at the same time she was dragged back by Jinwan. As she ran, she looked back and noticed that the man seemed to be planning to hit them with the car. Feng Ling frowned and abruptly stopped. "Mrs. Mo, you go first." She couldn't implicate Jinwan. "Why should I go? I'm not a brother from your 11 base. I don't know what sacrifice and morality are, but in my eyes you're already a very good friend of mine. How can I leave you alone?" Jinwan reached out to pull her back. "Run first. There's an alley ahead. His car can't drive in. We'll think of a way after we get in." Seeing Jinwan's insistence, Feng Ling ran a few steps and felt that it would take at least a few days for her body to recover from the electric shock. Right now, she couldn't run as fast as usual. Today's update will show a new chapter every 1 or 2 minutes. Today there are a total of 30 chapters, 60,000 words, and tomorrow there will be 10 chapters, 20,000 words. It will be slowly refreshed chapter by chapter. Babies waiting for more chapters, please be patient. Chapter 1099. Just as the two of them were about to run to the entrance of another alley that Jinwan mentioned, suddenly, a black jeep sped up from the road in front of them and slammed on the brakes with a screech sound. Feng Ling and Jinwan raised their eyes and saw that the back door of the jeep was open from the inside out. The man in the driver's seat glanced at the blood on Feng Ling's body and said coldly, "Get in the car." As soon as she saw that the person in the car was Li Nanheng, Feng Ling froze, but Jinwan quickly helped Feng Ling, who had been injured, into the car. When Feng Ling sat firmly in the car, she looked back and saw that Jinwan hadn't gotten in the car yet, so she reached out to pull her. "Mrs. Mo, come on." Then the sound of the car outside was cut off, and the tense atmosphere in the air finally relaxed. Because the person who suddenly appeared here was Li Nanheng and the driver was Li Nanheng, Feng Ling knew that no matter what, she wouldn't die today. Jinwan sat by Feng Ling's side and pulled her sleeve. "You're bleeding a lot. Do you want to go to the hospital to stop the bleeding or go somewhere else?" Just as the two of them sat in the back of the car and talked, Li Nanheng didn't look at them but just looked coldly at the car that dared to chase them. His cold face was mixed with a hint of cold killing intent, and he suddenly swerved the jeep beautifully outside the alley. The car was going to hit them, but it was caught off guard and slammed heavily into the wall of the alley, making a loud crash. Li Nanheng reversed the car again, turned the car around and crashed into the car that was stuck against the wall. Feng Ling and Jin Wan only felt the force of the collision in the car. When they turned their eyes, they saw that the car had been directly hit into the entrance of the alley by the jeep. The car was stuck there, unable to get in or out. At the same time, the gas tank of the car had leaked and gasoline was dripping down. If someone threw a cigarette but here at this time, the people in the car would never have a chance to survive, because when the car was hit, it was stuck in the alley. The doors on both sides were tightly stuck to the wall. The doors couldn't be opened and the front and back windows were so solid. It was very difficult to escape from the car in a short time. Feng Ling looked up at the man in the driver's seat. She was sure that if this was not an ordinary residential area but an open field, he would throw a cigarette but over mercilessly. But this was a residential area. If a car here spontaneously ignited and exploded, it would affect the residents of this community. The man looked coldly at the car that had been completely shackled in the alley, and at the same time he backed the black jeep and drove it out of this community. Feng Ling, you're bleeding too much. Let's go to the hospital, Jin Wan said worriedly. Jin Wan, Li Nanheng said. Without waiting for Feng Ling to speak, Li Nanheng said mildly, take her to my place first. I have gauze and hemostatic medicine. Jin Wan, help her bandage. Do you have a place to live in T-City? Jin Wan turned her eyes to Li Nanheng. It seemed that he had just arrived, but people like them were all cunning rabbits and had many places to live in. She said, is it far? My apartment is very close to here. She can go to my place to have her wound bandaged. Forget it. We can't go there together now in case you get into trouble. Li Nanheng spat out these words coldly and glanced at Jin Wan through the rearview mirror. Why were you there just now? If something like this happens again, remember to run first, okay? Otherwise, if something happens to you, I'm afraid your man will chase me to the Pacific Ocean, and I won't be able to live in peace for the rest of my life. Feng Ling remained silent and just covered the part of her arm where the wound was more serious and bleeding more. Jin Wan turned back to look at her. Are you hurt anywhere else? Don't keep silent. Tell me where it hurts. If it's too serious, just go home to have it bandaged. You have to go to the hospital to get stitches. Feng Ling shook her head, meaning that she was fine and didn't need to worry so much. Just then, they noticed that several cars were driving in the opposite direction from them. Then, in an instant, several cars drove into the residential area behind them, surrounding the car that was trapped in the alley. It was not difficult to see that they were from 11 Base. Feng Ling didn't expect that 11 Base's people could be seen so easily in China. Did Li Nanheng specially come to T-City with full preparation? Did he expect that something would happen to her before he came? Did he come to help her out? Jin Wan took out a wet towel from her bag to wipe away the blood on Feng Ling's face. Seeing that Feng Ling's complexion was pale, she furrowed her brows and asked, someone actually dares to wield a knife in broad daylight in the country. Are there any powerful connections behind this? Can you call the police? The domestic police can't handle this kind of thing, Feng Ling said lightly and looked up at the man who was driving in front of her. As if feeling her gaze, Li Nanheng drove the black jeep to the main road in the traffic flow and looked at her through the rearview mirror for a moment. Feng Ling immediately looked away, but the man in the driver's seat smiled faintly and continued to drive calmly. Li Nanheng's so-called residence in T-City was a suite on the top floor of a hotel that he had temporarily booked. No one was allowed to enter this entire floor. After arriving at the place, Jin Wan had been taking care of Feng Ling, helping her take off her clothes and dressing her wounds. Feng Ling had never experienced such a pure same-sex friendship since she was a child. She used to live like a man in the base, but now suddenly being cared for like this, she was not used to it. Can't you lift your hand now? I'll help you take it off. Don't move. Jin Wan took off Feng Ling's clothes. Feng Ling didn't refuse and took off her clothes. Fortunately, there was a conservative black sportswear inside. Jin Wan saw the wounds on her body and hurriedly turned to run into the bathroom to wash a towel and help her wipe the blood around the wounds. Li Nanheng came over with the hotel's medicine box and saw this scene. His eyes paused on Feng Ling, who was only wearing sports underwear. Before he spoke, Jin Wan had quickly come over, snatched the medicine box from his hand, and turned back to disinfect and stop the bleeding for Feng Ling. The room was very quiet. Jin Wan was bandaging Feng Ling's wounds, and suddenly it seemed that Li Nanheng, a big man, was superfluous. Jin Wan also turned to look at him from time to time, which was obviously a silent question. Feng Ling was sitting here wearing so little. How could a big man like him have the nerve to watch by the side? Perhaps because Jin Wan's look was too obvious, Li Nanheng coughed and went out. Chapter 1100. After treating Feng Ling's wound, Jin Wan rummaged for a black t-shirt that Li Nanheng had worn and put it on her. After a while Li Nanheng came in again. Seeing that Jin Wan had squatted down to treat the wound on Feng Ling's leg, he raised his eyebrows and chuckled. "You're quite thoughtful. Miss Ji is much more useful than before." Jin Wan silently rolled her eyes at the disinfectant in her hand, thinking that Li Nanheng wanted to bandage Feng Ling's wound himself but couldn't do it, so he was angry with her. At this time there was a knock on the door. Mo Jingshan came. Jin Wan, who had been cold to Mo Jingshan for a long time because of something, turned her eyes to the door with a jerk and was a little surprised. "Who is it?" Li Nanheng glanced at her surprised expression. "Don't think too much. I just went out and called Mo Jingshan. He happened to be nearby. Who do you think will come now?" "Jin Wan? Your man is here. Are you going to open the door or should I?" Li Nanheng now felt that Jin Wan was too conspicuous in front of Feng Ling, so he couldn't get close to her. If he didn't mention Mo Jingshan, Feng Ling would probably leave with Jin Wan without saying a word to him. The man just stood there. Although his tall figure blocked the door, he couldn't block the sound coming from the other side of the door, and he looked like he was about to laugh. The door rang for a while. The great Mr. Mo had been blocked by the door for so long. Jin Wan was in a dilemma. Feng Ling looked at them, suddenly put down the leg that was being treated and said, "Let me open the door." Li Nanheng glanced at her coldly. "Don't be nosy." Feng Ling's expression faltered. Ever since the last time in the hotel, he kept calling her his wife, causing her heart to be in a mess. Those emotions that she couldn't control made her instinctively want to avoid him. However, she didn't need to avoid him. He never appeared again. Now he suddenly appeared here. Feng Ling didn't say anything but pretended not to hear him and turned to Jin Wan. "Mr. Mo must have come to see you. Go open the door. The wound on my leg is not serious. I can do it myself." Jin Wan wiped her hands and got up to open the door. While Jin Wan was busy dealing with Mo Jingshan, Li Nanheng stood in the room and looked at Feng Ling, who was trying to apply medicine on her own. He walked over, picked up the anti-inflammatory and hemostatic ointment in front of her, lowered his body, bent over, and applied the ointment evenly on the wounds on her legs that were not serious but not too light. Because the man's fingertips were stained with ointment and touched her wound, the pain that she had been enduring just now seemed to be piercing her heart. She sat there silently and didn't move, just looking at her leg. "You've been injured a lot since you were a child. Why can't you remember that when the enemy has a weapon and you don't have a weapon, you should be good at using everything you can to resist, instead of your own arms and legs? You're made of flesh and blood. How can you resist those knives and guns?" Li Nanheng said like a worrisome elder as he helped her apply the ointment. Perhaps it was because the man only mentioned how she should block other people's weapons. Feng Ling's voice was slightly hoarse as she said, "It's easy for you to say. At that time, there wasn't even a stone on the ground in the alley. There were walls on both sides. What could I use to block?" Li Nanheng raised his head. He held the ointment in one hand and placed the other on her leg. "I've taught you how to untie belts so many times. Those people just now all have belts on them. Don't you know how to pull off their belts and beat them?" Feng Ling, what? Wasn't he the one who forcefully pressed down on her hand to undo his belt? How could she think of such a way at that time? At this time, Mo Jingshan had come in, but he clearly had more important things to talk about with Mrs. Mo. He glanced at her wound, made sure that it was only a skin wound and not serious, and turned to go next door. Jin Wan was about to walk to Feng Ling when Feng Ling turned to say, "Speaking of which, if Mrs. Mo hadn't helped me today, I wouldn't have been able to escape so smoothly." She actually said this to Mr. Mo next door. They had been in a cold war recently, and now Jin Wan was almost in trouble because of her. If she didn't quickly help Jin Wan out, Mr. Mo's eyes would probably be sharp enough to kill her. Jin Wan simply avoided all of them and went into the kitchen to find water to drink. Li Nanheng glanced expressionlessly at the kitchen and then at Feng Ling. "Is that so? Then as a bodyguard you're going to lose your job, right? Do you want to go back to America with me, back to the base?" Feng Ling, no. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved. Before he spoke, Jin Wan, who had a strong sense of presence today, came out of the kitchen to pour water for Feng Ling and fed it to her. At the same time she said, "Yes, I'm not going back. Feng Ling is fine by my side. Why go back to the base in America? What's so good about being with a group of men and suffering? And even if I don't completely need a bodyguard, I still need a good sister by my side. Don't you think so, Feng Ling?" Perhaps Jin Wan's soft and tough character was really infected by Feng Ling, who was usually as hard as a rock. Feng Ling looked at Jin Wan and smiled. Seeing Feng Ling smile at Jin Wan, Li Nanheng's heart skipped a beat. It seemed that after being with Jin Wan for a long time, Feng Ling had gained a lot of feelings that she had never had before, such as patience and gentleness. Does it hurt? Jin Wan saw a red and swollen area around Feng Ling's ankle and bent down to touch it. No, Feng Ling answered with a smile. At this time Mo Jingshan came out from next door. Watching the two of them acting like sisters, the two men who were completely ignored exchanged a silent look. Not long after, Jin Wan was still led into the kitchen by Mo Jingshan, and the kitchen door was abruptly closed. Glancing at the kitchen door that was closed, Feng Ling sat in her original position without moving, but then she remembered that she had been driving outside to avoid that group of people for the past 2 days. Her cell phone was almost out of battery. She didn't know if her cell phone was broken during the fight earlier. She was about to reach out to take out her cell phone from her pocket when suddenly, a familiar cool smell came to her nose. She raised her head abruptly and almost hit Li Nanheng's chin. She saw the man suddenly bent down and picked her up from the sofa. Her feet suddenly left the ground and she subconsciously looked at him. What are you doing? Chapter 11:01. As she spoke, Feng Ling carefully moved her head back to avoid pressing against his chin, which would be too intimate. Don't you know what the husband and wife are doing in the kitchen? You're only separated by a wall. Don't you feel awkward? The man's voice was indifferent and he spoke matter-of-factly. He carried her to another bedroom next to this suite and placed Feng Ling on the bed. As soon as her body touched the bed, Feng Ling shrank back. However, her body was injured and it was inconvenient for her to make any big movements. She only shrank back twice and sat in the middle of the bed, looking at the man by the bed with some wariness in her eyes. Earlier, he had noticed that she seemed to want to take out something from her pocket. Li Nanheng leaned down and Feng Ling immediately looked at him warily. However, the man only took out the phone from her pocket. She saw that this phone was still a model from 2 or 3 years ago. It was a waterproof tablet phone. It was black, unlike the pink and white models that young girls like to buy nowadays. To Feng Ling, a phone was only used for communication. Except for her short hair, she was a girl from head to toe, but she really did not have a girl's heart at all. Playing with the phone that was about to run out of battery, Li Nanheng glanced at her again. Feng Ling raised her hand to take the phone, but the man raised his hand slightly. I'll help you charge it. Be good and rest here. You can't move around with your injuries. I didn't bring a charger. There will be one at the hotel front desk. I'll ask them to send it over according to your phone model. As Li Nanheng spoke, he took her cell phone out of the bedroom. Within 10 minutes, he brought in a charging cable that could charge her cell phone and charged it on the socket beside her bed. Feng Ling did not speak. She glanced at her phone and then at the quilt by the side. Li Nanheng understood and reached out to cover her with the quilt. As she was sitting against the headboard, the quilt could only cover her lower abdomen, and her upper body was still outside. The man sat by the bed and looked at the little woman who was wearing his clothes again after such a long time. She was wearing his short-sleeved t-shirt. The loose t-shirt seemed to be too big on her body, and at the same time, it made her arms seem even more slender. However, her fair and slender arms were covered with wounds of varying depths and were red and swollen. I see that you are very close to Jin Wan now. What, do you like her very much? Li Nanheng helped her pull up the quilt. His tone of speaking while sitting on the bed made it seem as if there were no grudges or conflicts between the two of them. It was just a simple conversation without any emotions mixed in. Mrs. Mo is very good to me and Mr. Mo is also very good. I'm very happy working here. Mrs. Mo is very easygoing and frank. She is the kind of person that people can easily befriend after spending a long time with. It's rare for me to accept a new friend, but this new friend is very good, Feng Ling answered calmly. Li Nanheng looked at her and suddenly turned sideways to approach her. He placed his hands on both sides of her body and pressed her against the headboard in an oppressive manner. Feng Ling looked at him warily. Before she spoke, the man's breath had already brushed against her nose, causing her to clench her hands on her lap. The two were too close. The man lowered his eyes to look at her. So, are you going to stay in China forever? You won't return to 11 Base N? Looking at the man's incomparably handsome face that was magnified in front of her due to the close distance, Feng Ling did not even blink and directly said, I cherish my current job very much. If Mr. Mo doesn't intend to fire me, I won't leave. Li Nanheng snorted. How long have you been with Jin Wan? Have you already fallen in love with her? As long as they don't let you go, you won't leave? King treated you with sincerity and kindness for so many years, and in the end, how did you treat me? You have a conscience to them, but why can't you have a conscience to me? Feng Ling's expression didn't change. You have a wife. If my heart is not good enough, I will do something out of line. Boss Li, you'd better put your heart and mind on your wife. There's no need to provoke me. Li Nanheng immediately raised his eyebrows and sneered. Jealous? Feng Ling put on a straight face and looked at him coldly. You think too much. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes to look at her and smiled faintly. He did not continue to interrogate her at this time. He stepped back and helped her pull up the quilt. Do you want to lie down or sit here to rest for the time being? I think it will take a while for Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan to finish. Just like this. There's no need to lie down. Li Nanheng didn't do anything else to her. He got up and walked out. I'll go outside to see what's going on. If you're jealous, hold it in. I'll ask the hotel to make some dumplings and send them up tonight. I don't think I need to be jealous. I can just watch you. Feng Ling. She suddenly raised her eyes to look at the man who had stood up and walked to the bedroom door. Seeing that he had closed the door and left, she suddenly grabbed the pillow behind her, ignored the pain of the wound on her arm and threw the pillow over. Originally it should have hit the door. Anyway, the pillow was so soft that it couldn't make any sound. However, at this moment, the man pushed open the door that hadn't been completely closed. The moment he turned around and was about to speak, the pillow hit his chest. Li Nanheng caught the pillow that suddenly fell from the sky, raised his eyebrows and glanced at her. Feng Ling looked at him silently and coldly. The man pinched the pillow in his arms and suddenly smiled at her meaningfully. She was so angry that her forehead was throbbing. Shameless. He was too shameless. She just couldn't figure out why her heart, which had always been as calm as still water, was suddenly in such turmoil recently. Previously, when she found out that he was married, her heart felt like it was dead and she didn't feel much. However, ever since he pressed her into his arms and kept calling her his wife, she had been on tenterhooks. Her heart hadn't been able to calm down. Now that she saw him, she wished that what she had thrown at him was not just a pillow but a grenade. Blow up this scumbag of a beast. Li Nanheng smiled and threw the pillow back to her, which landed by Feng Ling's bed. Feng Ling ignored the pillow and retracted her gaze. She planned to close her eyes and lean against the headboard to rest for a while. However, she suddenly heard the man in front of the door say with a faint smile, "Are you hungry? Do you want me to get you a plate of dumplings now?" Feng Ling abruptly grabbed the pillow that had just been thrown back. She resisted the urge to throw it at him again and turned to look at him. The moment the man received her sharp gaze, he smiled, closed the door and left. Feng Ling silently pinched the corner of the pillow and stared at the closed door. Chapter 1102. So, it turned out that in the past month he had gone to solve those things? How did he solve them? This man always did everything without batting an eyelid. Jin Wan had thought that he was simply angry with her and gave her the cold shoulder for a month. It turned out that he was actually so decisive. She suddenly lowered her eyes. For a moment she didn't even know what she was angry about. In the past month, had she calmed down? She had indeed calmed down, and she was way too calm. She glanced at Mo Jingshan again. On my birthday you were the one who made the cake. Why didn't you tell me? As she spoke, she puffed up her cheeks unhappily, but this unhappiness didn't come from anger. Instead, she was annoyed that because of what happened in her previous life, she was too subjective and defensive when looking at certain things. Instead, she neglected too much warmth and detail. Perhaps she was only annoyed. You still know that I made those cakes? When I cut them one by one, I didn't see your heart ache, the man said half-jokingly, stroking her hand. You're not angry anymore, En? What was there to be angry about? Jin Wan wasn't that unreasonable. She wouldn't give up a good man. Was she really going to give up this piece of meat to someone else? She wasn't a masochist. Jin Wan suddenly pulled down one of his hands that was leaning against the wall behind her. She held his palm that was much larger than her own. It was hard to imagine how he had the energy to make so many cakes for her that day. Whether it was the cream or the base cake, the taste was especially sweet and soft. This man could do everything so well. He was really impeccable. She held his hand in her palm and then held his slender fingers, whispering, "Then what do you want as compensation?" Mo Jingshan looked at her and his eyes were full of smiles. He held her hand, lowered his head to kiss it, and then leaned over to kiss her lips. He pressed his lips against hers and said hoarsely in a low voice, "What do you think I need as compensation?" Jin Wan's body immediately softened from his kiss. She pursed her lips and said, "How about I make 21 dishes for you tonight? After you're done, you're going to throw them away right in front of me? Am I that childish?" "You mean I'm childish?" Jin Wan hadn't cooked for a long time, not even since she came to Tea City. Now she was trying to make up for her mistake and give him a chance to take revenge, but he didn't appreciate her kindness, so he couldn't blame her for this. She was not to blame. Suddenly, a few dong-dong sounds came from the wall outside the kitchen. Nanhing knocked on the wall a few times. You two don't go too far. You've been in there for so long. Do you need me to take Feng Ling away and leave this room to you? Jin Wan subconsciously tugged on Mo Jingshan's hand, rushing to leave. However, Mo Jingshan did not move. He pulled her back and took the opportunity to hold the little woman who was leaning against the wall to maintain a distance from him. He whispered by her ear, "Giving up the room to us is not a bad choice." Jin Wan, she pressed her hand against his chest. Feng Ling was just injured, and it's clear that she's being chased by some unknown force. After all, she's someone you hired. You have to be concerned about her safety. How can there be such a cold-blooded boss like you? With Nanhang here, she doesn't need my concern. His words were simple and straightforward, and then he seemed to be warning and commanding, in the future if there are any illegal activities with unknown pursuers or foreigners, you're not allowed to approach. Although Feng Ling is good at martial arts, her background isn't simple. When the situation is tense, what you have to do is to take care of yourself first, understand? Today, when Jin Wan rushed into the alley with a baseball bat, it was probably because Feng Ling was among the people inside that she thought Feng Ling could handle it, so she had the courage to rush in to help. Of course, she had the awareness to protect herself, but she wasn't too weak. It was not Jin Wan's style to hide when something happened. Of course, she wouldn't let others worry about her. I know. When it's cold, I don't see you. When it's good, you come to manage me like a housekeeper, Jin Wan muttered. Mo Jingshan. When Jin Wan walked out of the kitchen, she saw that Feng Ling had put on her black sports coat. If it weren't for the fact that she was only wearing underwear inside and couldn't take it off, she would most likely have changed out of Nanhang's black t-shirt. She saw Feng Ling sitting on the sofa with the coat on, as though the person who was injured earlier was not her. Except for her complexion being paler than usual, there was no difference. Was this the reason she had received training? She couldn't even cry out in pain and had to endure all kinds of feelings as though they had never happened? You're finally willing to come out. I thought the two of you would stay in my kitchen until the end of time. Nanheng leaned against the wall outside the kitchen door with a cold smile. His eyes glanced at Jin Wan's expression, which had softened a lot. He didn't need to guess to know that this little woman had most likely been coaxed. Mo Jingshan placed his hand on Jin Wan's waist, encircling the little woman who was about to head to the sofa in his arms to stop her from running away. He glanced at Feng Ling and the medicine box by her feet, and then his gaze fell on Nanheng. They went around in such a big circle. Is their target her or you? Nanheng's expression was indifferent and lazy. We're all people who work in 11 base. Their biggest target is either me or her. What's the difference? Mo Jingshan looked at him and said indifferently, your own woman has been injured to such a state. Right now, you clearly want to personally uproot the nest of those pieces of trash, but now you can lean against here and smile as though nothing happened. Even Jin Wan isn't as big-hearted as you. Nanheng, Jin Wan? What did this have to do with her? Mr. Mo, I'm not his woman. Although you're my current boss, please don't randomly put labels on me, Feng Ling spoke up, protesting unhappily. However, Mo Jingshan appeared as though he did not hear her words. He only coldly glanced at Nanheng. Nanheng was silent for several seconds, temporarily withdrawing his lazy attitude. These days women are not easy to raise. Whether they're light or heavy is a mistake. Keeping them by your side is a mistake. Letting them out is also a mistake. Jin Wan did not understand his words. Sitting on the sofa, Feng Ling's expression turned cold. Chapter 1103. After hanging up the phone, Li Nanheng opened the door and went to the bedroom. Feng Ling had already woken up. What do you want to eat? Li Nanheng turned on the bedroom light. Feng Ling slowly sat up on the bed and turned to look at the sky outside the window. What time is it? 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You haven't eaten anything since noon. Your current boss, Missouri Jingshan, said that you should have a good rest here and don't have to accompany Jin Wan. Feng Ling raised her hand to take the cell phone, but it was difficult for her to do so because of the injury on her arm. Li Nanheng came over to take the cell phone for her and handed it to her. She took a look at it and found that it was really past 4 o'clock. What do you want to eat? The man asked patiently. There's nothing delicious. Feng Ling was not very comfortable because of her injury. It was uncomfortable to move even a little, but she didn't want to lie in bed all the time. She slowly moved her body to get out of bed. Li Nanheng knew that she didn't like to lie all the time, so he reached out to help her. Come on, slow down. The man's gentle and patient voice made Feng Ling turn to look at him. Their eyes met and Li Nanheng looked at her. What's wrong? Where does it hurt? No. Feng Ling didn't say much. She walked out of the bedroom, sat down in the living room of this suite and then looked around. There were several other rooms here. Even if she really listened to Mr. Mo's arrangement and recuperated here temporarily, Li Nanheng shouldn't be so beastly as to do anything to her. Due to their work and occupation they were often injured. In the past she had recuperated in Li Nanheng's place. This seemingly cold and domineering man always seemed to have a knack for taking care of her. She was used to it. She glanced at the injury on her arm and asked, "When should I change the dressing?" "At 8 o'clock, simply scrub and change the dressing. After that, lie down and sleep." Li Nanheng casually threw the medicine box on the coffee table. Feng Ling saw that there were several kinds of good wound medicine in the medicine box. She guessed that he had asked someone to buy them when she accidentally fell asleep in the bedroom. People who came from 11 base always dealt with their wounds by themselves. At most, they would go to doctor when in the base. Otherwise, they would just apply some medicine and wouldn't go to the hospital. Everyone was very good at bandaging. Even Feng Ling had gradually gained some experience in bandaging, not to mention Boss Lee who had been in the base for so many years. He said to change the dressing at 8 o'clock, so he had to wait until 8 o'clock. What should he do now? She didn't want to go back to sleep and she didn't want to stay with him, like this. Originally, Feng Ling was not hungry, but perhaps it was because she had just woken up and felt that she was not hungry, but her stomach was already growling. Li Nanheng glanced at her and repeated the previous question. "What do you want to eat?" "Apart from dumplings, anything is fine." Feng Ling pressed her stomach, her expression clearly unhappy. Li Nanheng smiled. "I heard that the dumplings in this hotel are not bad. They are handmade." "I'm not eating." "Then what do you want to eat?" Feng Ling stood up from the sofa and slowly walked a few steps. She really didn't want to stay in the same room with him, but if she went out alone at this time, she would either cause trouble for Li Nanheng or Mr. Mo, and it was not the time to be willful and mischievous. Feng Ling walked to the window and looked out. She saw a gourmet restaurant not far away. She said, "Mrs. Mo passed by this place with me some time ago. We ate at this gourmet restaurant. There's a noodle shop here that serves pretty good rice noodles." "You like to eat rice noodles?" "I didn't eat it in the United States before. After coming to China, I tasted a lot of new things and found that rice noodles are very delicious." Feng Ling answered and turned to look at him. "Can I eat rice noodles?" "Of course." Li Nanheng picked up the phone. "I'll ask them to pack it up for you." "No, I want to go out to eat by myself." Li Nanheng glanced at her. "You still want to go out with such injuries?" "It's just a skin wound. I'm very energetic after sleeping for an afternoon. As long as I walk slowly and don't pull my wounds, I'll be fine. You know I'm used to exercising. It's uncomfortable to keep me in the room." Seeing that she insisted, he knew that she was trying to avoid the awkwardness of being in the same room with him. After waking up, she seemed to be in a much better state. As long as she wore long-sleeved clothes, the wounds on her arms and legs could be covered. Except for her slightly pale face, there was nothing unusual. Li Nanheng urged someone to send the clothes he had arranged for someone to buy for her. He asked Feng Ling to go back to the room to change and took her out. Feng Ling's legs still hurt when she walked, but it didn't affect her. When they walked into the elevator, Li Nanheng looked down at the little woman who was leaning against the wall of the elevator with a pale face. "Didn't you say it doesn't hurt? Didn't you say you can endure it? It's not too late to ask someone to pack it up and send it up." "No need." He was as stubborn as ever for 8 years. Li Nanheng resisted the urge to rub her hair, put his hand in his trouser pocket, and sighed helplessly and indulgently. If he touched her at this time, even if it was just a strand of her hair, she would probably explode in anger. In the past, he felt uncomfortable because she was always suppressing her emotions and being too calm, but now he finally knew how to provoke her. She was indeed aroused by the slightest provocation. If he wanted to coexist peacefully and lure her heart back, he still needed some countermeasures. Although T-City was about to enter winter and the weather was very cold, it was like a city that never slept. It was nearly 5 o'clock in the evening and the wind was very strong. The cold wind blew on her face like a knife and drilled into her neck. The coat Li Nanheng asked someone to buy for her was warm, but the person in charge of buying the clothes forgot to buy a scarf. Seeing her neck being blown by the wind, the man who was walking beside her suddenly stretched out his long arm and took her into his arms. He opened his coat and wrapped Feng Ling. The man was so much taller than her, and his coat was open enough to cover her exposed neck under the cold wind. Feng Ling stiffened and wanted to push him away, but she couldn't use too much strength in her arms and legs, or her wounds would hurt. She resisted as she walked, but the man held her tighter when she resisted. Don't make trouble. Do you want to get hurt and catch a cold? Feng Ling had to be held by him and turned to look at the road opposite the hotel. At this time the street lights were lined up, illuminating the entire night sky above her head. There were many shops near the hotel and all kinds of things were available. They were getting closer and closer to the food city she wanted to go to. Although the food city was only one street away from her, it would only take more than 10 minutes to walk there. Li Nanheng seemed to be afraid that she would really freeze, so he reached out to hail a taxi and open the door. Go in. Chapter 1104. When this man was domineering, she couldn't refuse any of his decisions. Feng Ling had no choice but to sit in the car. She was about to raise her hand to close the door, but the man sat in the car instead of sitting in the front passenger seat. Feng Ling wanted to ask him why he didn't sit in the front, but when the words came to her mouth, she felt that it seemed to be too cumbersome and nonsense, so she simply didn't say it. The man didn't look at her expression. After telling the driver the destination, he glanced at the time on his wrist and handed his wrist to her. Feng Ling was confused and looked at the watch on the man's wrist. There were a few small letters on the shiny dial. When she was in 11 base, she didn't understand a lot of things. Later, when she went to Boston, she often heard those students with good family backgrounds talking about various luxuries, so she knew that the black watch Li Nanheng was wearing was a sports-style watch from Patek Philippe, which was worth more than 10 million yuan, and this sports style was also a limited edition. She thought that the man was showing his aesthetic in this aspect, or simply using this matter to find a topic to avoid the awkward silence, so she said coldly and politely, "It looks good." Li Nanheng. He really wanted to pry open her head and see how the things in her head were grown. It's already 5 o'clock. Come back after dinner. It's not suitable for you to walk outside for a long time. Li Nanheng glanced at her and explained why he showed her the watch. Feng Ling froze and realized that she had misunderstood his meaning. She hummed and didn't say anything more. However, although this place was really close to the food city she wanted to go to, after all, there were often traffic jams on this busy road. 5 o'clock was already the rush hour in every city in China, and this large-scale traffic jam was estimated to last until after 6:30. The taxi was stuck at the intersection for more than 10 minutes. Sitting in the car, Feng Ling heard that Li Nanheng was answering the phone at this time. Although he was in T-City, he had a lot of things to do in the United States and often received calls from there. She took the opportunity to turn to look at the man beside her. At such a close distance, she could see that the man's eyes were deep and clear. She didn't know what had happened when he picked up the phone. He seemed to be silent for a moment, then lightly continued to say something to the other side. Because she didn't know what exactly it was, she didn't listen carefully. She just sat beside him and watched as the streetlights outside the car window shone in, casting a shadow under the bridge of his tall and straight nose. After another 10 minutes, the car finally drove to the opposite side in the intermittent traffic and stopped at the main entrance of the food city. Li Nanheng opened the door and got out of the car. When she was about to come out, he turned back to help her, but Feng Ling did not hold his hand. She only relied on her left hand, which was less injured, to support herself on the seat and moved out bit by bit. Seeing that she didn't even want to touch his hand, Li Nanheng stood outside the car door and looked at her calmly. After getting out of the car, Feng Ling looked up at him. Go in and go back after eating. I won't waste too much time outside. Although she didn't know what he said on the phone, she heard that Li Nanheng said he would talk about it when he went back at night, so she guessed that he would be busy in the study for a while after returning. He nodded and watched as she turned into the food court. Although she was injured, her back was still straight. Perhaps because she had been training in the base for many years, Feng Ling was much straighter and more steady than many young people who swayed when they walked. Her back was lonely. After entering the food city, she found that there were a lot of people here at this time. Compared with the various independent restaurants and small restaurants outside, this place was a bit messy and noisy, and there were people all around. She finally found an empty seat to sit down. Feng Ling's face was pale because of the pain from her wound caused by 2 passers-by, but she didn't speak, just sat there and looked around, looking for the rice noodles she had eaten with Jinwan before. Li Nanheng saw that her face turned pale after being hit just now. After confirming that she was sitting here safely, he said, "Which rice noodles do you want to eat?" Feng Ling looked back at him, only to see that Boss Li, who usually went in and out of major hotels and even the United Nations State Banquet venue, was standing in this crowded food city. He didn't look out of place at all, but standing in the crowd like this, he seemed to be much less arrogant, and when he looked at her, there seemed to be a doting smile in his eyes. It seemed that even if she wanted to go out and dig a pit to eat beggar's chicken, he could take her to dig a pit, not to mention she just wanted to find a small stall to eat rice noodles in this crowded food city. Feng Ling glanced back and pointed to a rice noodle stall with a lot of people lining up at the corner ahead. Last time Mrs. Mo took me to eat there. The taste is quite good. She saw that there were many people lining up there, and the line was the longest in front of all the stalls in this food city. There was no doubt that the taste should be really good. But there are too many people in the line. Let's just eat something else. Feng Ling glanced at other stalls and didn't know what to eat. Seeing her hesitation, Li Nanheng didn't speak and went straight to the stall of the rice noodle shop. When Feng Ling looked back at the man again, he had already walked over there. Li Nanheng had lived a luxurious life since he was a child. Even if he trained all day in 11 base, he was still the eldest grandson of the Li family and then the boss. No one dared to let him line up anywhere. Such a long line. Would he jump the queue or something? Or, with his impatient temper, he might just take the money for the people at the back and ask them to wait for him at the back while he openly ran to the front. No matter what, Feng Ling didn't like it. In the past, she rarely came into contact with these smoky places. She didn't expect that Mrs. Mo, the wife of Xiao Mo and the daughter of the Ji family, would find such a place with all kinds of delicious food, and the price was not expensive, as if everything was delicious. Feng Ling fell in love with it after coming here once. So she didn't want anyone to destroy the balance in this smoky place. Just when she was wondering if Li Nanheng would do that, she turned her head again, only to see that the tall and outstanding man in the crowd stood at the back of the crowd and waited in a long line obediently and patiently. It seemed that he didn't have any impatient expression. While waiting in line, he looked at the other stalls next to him, as if he was afraid that she would be bored sitting there alone, so he bought some snacks for her. Chapter 1105. Feng Ling continued to sit at this table without moving, and Li Nanheng was still queuing up. However, the snacks he bought in passing were soon delivered to her and placed on the table in front of her. Feng Ling lowered her head to see that there were all kinds of small jerky and delicious side dishes on the plate, as well as several attractive-looking kebabs, a plate of fruit salad and 2 bottles of mineral water. And the smell of food here was indeed very strong. Jinwan had told her last time that eating in such a place would give her a different kind of happiness. Now Feng Ling also felt that eating in such a place was really satisfying, which was a feeling that all kinds of high-end restaurants could not satisfy. Li Nanheng queued for about 20 minutes and finally came over with a large bowl of rice noodles. Feng Ling took a look and found that this man really didn't regard her as an outsider. This rice noodles was a big pot for 2 people, not separate small portions. At the same time, someone eagerly came up to deliver 2 bowls and cutlery. The man bought some other things that she liked before returning and sitting down in front of her. "Why did you buy such a big pot?" "I think the individual small portions are more cost-effective than this," Feng Ling said as she raised her hand to try to pry open the chopsticks. However, she didn't expect that one day, there would be a day when she couldn't even pry open a pair of chopsticks. The main reason was that she couldn't exert force on the wound on her arm. If she exerted a little force, the wound that had just stopped bleeding would bleed again. Li Nanheng casually took the chopsticks in her hand, helped her pry open the chopsticks and then handed it to her. At the same time he said mildly, "In the base, when you usually sit together with a group of brothers and eat together, why don't I see you as an outsider? When did you not sit together to eat when you were out on a mission? Now you don't feel comfortable eating a pot of rice noodles with me?" With that, without waiting for her to explain, he picked up the small bowl in front of her, picked up some rice noodles for her, and then placed it in front of her. Feng Ling. She just wanted to ask because she saw that the rice noodles for 2 in this big pot cost 38 yuan, while the rice noodles for a single person only cost 15 yuan. Moreover, it seemed like there wasn't much difference in the food inside. She just wanted to say that it wasn't worth it. However, thinking that the person in front of him was Li Nanheng after all, he simply didn't care about the 8 yuan and picked up the chopsticks to eat. When she scooped some soup into the pot with a small spoon, Feng Ling noticed that there seemed to be a lot of seafood in the soup base. She turned back to look at the sign and saw the difference between the large and small portions. It turned out that there were so many things in the large portion. She hadn't noticed it earlier. In that case, the extra 8 yuan was well worth it. She didn't say anything, nor did she say anything because of the topic just now. She just silently picked up the seafood in the soup base one by one into the bowl in front of her. Seeing her eating silently, Li Nanxing asked mildly with a smile, "Didn't you think it's not worth it?" Miss Feng, who is so calculative, over 8 yuan, did you find something good in the soup? Feng Ling. I didn't notice earlier. How is it? Is it delicious? So delicious that you don't even want to raise your head? Can't you look at me when you speak? Feng Ling looked up at him. Do I have to look at you when I eat? After all, this meal is on me. You don't look at me when you eat, nor do you speak. Where's the basic courtesy? Feng Ling's eyelids twitched and she glanced at him strangely. All the food and drinks on this table added up to only about 100 yuan. What was wrong with him, the dignified Li Nanheng, to sit here and argue with her like the commoners around him? She didn't look at him when she ate. What's wrong? She replied coldly, you have so many requirements for treating me to dinner. Can't I just invite you back next time? Li Nanheng put down the chopsticks in his hand and looked at her for a moment. Feng Ling had already lowered her head and continued to eat her rice noodles seriously. However, the man suddenly said with a faint smile, you have to keep your words. Since you said you'll invite me back next time, you have to find time to invite me back. When do you plan to come out to eat with me again? Feng Ling's chopsticks paused. Only then did she realize that she seemed to have been set up by this man and had unintentionally agreed to another meal. Li Nanheng pointed at her chin. There are soup stains. Feng Ling raised her hand and was about to take a napkin to wipe it, but the man had already picked up a napkin and wiped a drop of soup off her chin. She sat there without moving. She watched as the man, who usually carried real knives and guns to kill enemies and terrorists in minefields, wiped her chin and mouth seriously with a napkin. Something she had been trying hard to keep out squeezed into her heart. She didn't know what it was. She only knew that her heart was somewhat hot. It was abnormally hot. In the darkness of the night outside the food city, the street lights were dim. The business here became more and more popular during the peak hours at night, and there were more and more people. The two of them sat close to the window by the food city, and they could see the dim yellow light, the traffic, and the crowd outside. At the next table, there were many young couples who had just gotten off work and were here to eat. There were also families of 3 who were eating with their children. There were old people and children, and it was like a picture of a group of people. There were all kinds of people. Feng Ling used a spoon to drink the soup. Li Nanheng didn't eat much rice noodles. He only threw a piece of jerky into his mouth and then ate while watching Feng Ling drink the soup. She glanced at him sideways. Can you not keep looking at me? The man's expression was cold and roguish as he curved his lips. I'm thinking about the day you landed in High City and how you looked in the hotel after getting drunk. Feng Ling's expression faltered. She still didn't know what happened after she drank a bottle of red wine on the plane until she woke up in the hotel. Hearing the man's words, she looked at him again. What happened to me? What did I say? Or what did I do? The man looked at her meaningfully and didn't say anything. Instead, he deliberately avoided the topic and said indifferently, It's been so long. You don't need to pretend to be a man anymore. Why haven't you grown your hair? Feng Ling didn't think much of it. Long hair is too troublesome. I'm used to short hair. She rarely paid attention to her appearance, nor did she care whether she was feminine or not. Anyway, she had always had short hair since she was a child. She felt that it was convenient to do everything this way, so she never thought of growing her hair long. She originally thought that Boss Li was reminding her that she was not feminine, but when she looked up, she saw Li Nanheng sitting in the crowd and smiling at her. His deep eyes were dark and translucent as if they were shining. The man was tall and had long legs. He was dressed in clean black clothes, and there was only a light layer of stubble around his chin. A certain strong sense of hormones enveloped his body. Chapter 1106. There were too many people coming and going, and they walked fast, bringing up a gust of wind. The man's hair swayed slightly, like the trees swaying silently in the dark night, or like the cold snow falling when the mountain on Rogers Pass shook, making her heart tremble inexplicably. It's good that you don't grow it. I'm used to seeing short hair. If you grow long hair one day, I'm afraid I won't even know where to put my hands. This man's words were ambiguous. Did he mean that he didn't know where to put his hands or didn't know where to put his hands? This pot of rice noodles was really too much. Li Nanheng was really not interested in this kind of food that girls like to eat. After accompanying her to eat a little, he got up and went out to buy something. Feng Ling focused on drinking the soup and ignored him. After a while, Li Nanheng came back with something. She looked up at him. What did you buy? He didn't say but just threw the bag to her. Go back and have a look. Feng Ling saw that there was a rectangular box in the bag. She didn't know what it was, but judging from the man's dusty appearance, it seemed that he had specially bought it. What could it be? However, when the man came back, he saw that she hadn't finished eating. It was probably too cold outside. He brought over a clean bowl and sat opposite her, eating the rice noodles and drinking the soup slowly. From time to time he picked up a handful of rice noodles and swung it in the air. It seemed that he was in a good mood. Feng Ling asked him, "How long will you stay in T-City this time? Don't you need to go back to the US?" Li Nanheng replied, "You are surrounded. How can I go back?" Feng Ling bit the rice noodles in her mouth. "How many days will it take to get rid of these people?" "Within 2 days." With Li Nanheng's swift and decisive style of handling matters, it was indeed possible to solve the problem within 2 days. After dinner, Feng Ling ate too much and really didn't want to take the car back, so Li Nanheng accompanied her to walk back in the early winter night of T-City. When passing by the hotel, Feng Ling hesitated. Li Nanheng seemed to know what she was thinking. On the way back, because she had eaten the rice noodles, she felt a little hot all over, so he didn't hug her again, but at this moment he suddenly took her into his arms and walked into the main entrance of the hotel, saying, "At this time, whether you go to Jinwan's place or Wen Liqing's place, you will only get yourself into trouble. The only person you can trouble is me, and the only person who can help you deal with those people is me. Why are you so ungrateful? Don't you know that the most important thing now is to hug my thigh tightly?" Feng Ling. She glanced down at his thighs meaningfully. Being glanced at by the woman meaningfully, although she just looked at his thighs, Li Nanheng found that he was shamefully stiff. He squinted at her. "What are you looking at?" "I'm looking at Boss Li's thighs. There are too many people who want to hug your thighs. I'm afraid I can't hug all of them even if I break my head," Feng Ling said as she walked to the elevator and tried to withdraw from his arms. However, the man held her tightly, lowered his head to her forehead and said hoarsely, "It depends on whether you want to hug me or not. As long as you want to hug me, I can get rid of all the pendants on my legs and leave them to you, okay?" Then what about his wife? What about the little wife he was talking about? Feng Ling ignored him and just entered the elevator. She had eaten a lot of food outside and thought it hadn't been long, but when she came back, it was already past 7 o'clock. They had agreed to change the dressing at 8 o'clock. Feng Ling went to the bathroom to give herself a simple bath. There was really no way to wash, so she could only wipe. Li Nanheng came in several times with a smile and asked to help her wash, but Feng Ling drove him out expressionlessly, blocked him outside the bedroom door and locked it from the inside. Although he knew that if he wanted to open the lock, he could easily open it. But the premise was that Li Nanheng could afford the price of really provoking Feng Ling. It was impossible for Li Nanheng not to know what the bottom line of this little woman who might explode at any time was. As long as he didn't touch her bottom line, it was fine to provoke her now. However, the door had been locked and the door could be broken. Otherwise, it was likely that this girl would really cut off contact in a rage, and even 9 bulls wouldn't be able to pull her back. Although he had already cast the net, he had to take it slow. After scrubbing, Feng Ling came out and changed her clothes. When she walked out of the bedroom, she saw that Li Nanheng had already prepared the new medicine he bought for her. She walked over, avoided the wounds on her body and slowly sat down on the sofa. The man looked at her exposed arms and legs as well as the wounds on her face and neck. The swelling had already subsided, but the scars were still there. He then looked at the bruises on her neck. In the afternoon it wasn't particularly obvious, but now that it had just been scrubbed with hot water, it was particularly obvious. "Were you pinched by those bastards?" The man applied medicine on his hand as he looked down at her. Feng Ling saw that he was staring at her neck and raised her hand to touch the marks on her neck. And Li Nanheng's gaze turned colder, and there was clearly a murderous glint in his eyes, but the murderous intent was definitely not directed at her. He raised her chin, put the ointment on her neck and slowly applied the ointment on the marks. The ointment was cool and comfortable. Feng Ling saw that the man lowered his head to help her apply the ointment, and she was a little embarrassed, so she simply closed her eyes and let him apply the ointment. However, she didn't know that the girl who had just taken a shower had wet hair, and there were red marks all over her face and body as if she had been ravaged. Her fair skin appeared even more fair and transparent because of the water vapor from the shower. She raised her head slightly and closed her eyes in front of the man, looking as though she was waiting for him to kiss her hard. Li Nanheng suppressed the fire in his heart, looked at the bruises on her neck, and looked at her face as he applied the ointment. This way he could see it clearly. Under the light, the shadows fell all over the floor and also fell on her face. The girl's face was white and clean, so delicate that even the pores couldn't be seen. Her eyes were closed, and when her eyelashes trembled, they were like butterfly wings. He looked at her slightly pale lips and inexplicably thought of the white frost on Roger's mountain that seemed to be immune to the cold. That kind of frost would only grow in bitter cold places and would rot in slightly warm places. Even if it was moved to a home and carefully cared for, it would still not survive. That kind of frost was the only comfort in bitter cold. It was clean and transparent, but it grew on a cliff. People without some ability couldn't even touch it, let alone take a look at it. Chapter 1107. Feng Ling. This woman. She clearly didn't have any femininity, but why was she so seductive? She had a gentle and harmless face, but it was like frost on a cliff. She would rather suffer the cold wind and rain than be touched by anyone. He focused his mind, instructed her not to move, and continued to apply medicine to the wound on her arm. She had probably sweated a little when she was eating rice noodles outside. Earlier, when she was scrubbing, she had wiped the wound slightly. Right now it looked a little red. The moment the medical cotton soaked with disinfectant rubbed the wound, she sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. Hiss. Feng Ling immediately opened her eyes. Do you think I'm a woman? Why are you so heavy-handed? Li Nanheng paused and smiled faintly. What about you? Do you think I'm your man? If there's a problem, you take it on yourself. If there's a problem, you run away. Didn't you immediately call me to come over? Feng Ling looked at him. The man was still in the posture of treating her wound with his head lowered. She found that right now she really wanted to fight with him every few words. She didn't say a word and let him help her disinfect and change the dressing. As if to prove that she could really withstand it, even when the disinfectant rubbed against her wound, she didn't make a sound. In the end, her eyes simply fell on her own legs. In the end, the man applied medicine on her leg again. When he lifted her leg, Feng Ling said that she could just do it like this. There was no need to lift it up, but the man said that his feet were numb and sat on the sofa next to her. He let her turn sideways and place her leg on his thigh. This position, especially when her pants were rolled up and her white legs were placed on his lap. No matter how she looked at it, this scene was very shameful. However, the man was helping her apply medicine with a serious expression. Li Nanheng's hand stroked her leg and he could not move his gaze away. No matter how Feng Ling looked at it, she felt that he was doing it on purpose. She wanted to pull her leg out, but the man seemed to inadvertently apply a cool ointment on her wound. She shivered from the pain and coldness. Once again, he naturally pressed her leg on his thigh and continued to stroke it. Feng Ling. In fact, for so many years, whether in 11 base or on missions, Feng Ling had suffered many injuries, but she had a unique advantage, that was, her wounds healed very quickly and she didn't have a constitution of scars. Many injuries were no longer obvious under the wear of time, and she needed to be close to the skin to see some faint traces. The only scar on her body that had always been relatively obvious was the wound on her shoulder that he had made with the cross knife. It didn't affect her appearance, but when she thought of the snake bite and the memory of almost losing her life in the Snake Valley, she would feel numb all over. He looked at the pair of fair and straight legs under his hand. She was such a good girl. She could have lived a luxurious life since she was a child. Like Feng Mingzhu, she was doted on like a treasure, but she suffered such a disaster for no reason. Even now, the Feng family didn't know that their youngest daughter, who they had missed and felt guilty for 20 years, grew up drinking wolf's milk in a wolf's cave. In order to survive in this cruel world, she had to cut her hair short, pretend to be a boy and live in 11 base. She had been pretending for many years. Her gender had been exposed. She could clearly live as a girl, but she had been used to that kind of life. He really wanted to make up for all the things she lacked in the past 20 years, to let her know that she didn't need to live in this world with such difficulty and that she could also be a little princess. The man's hand stroked her leg, and the medicine on the wound had been evenly applied. Feng Ling followed his gaze down and saw that his hand was on her knee. He paused and did not move again. Have you applied it? She asked. Li Nanheng glanced at her at this time. Do you have to live alone outside like this? Do you really not plan to find your family? No. Feng Ling answered straightforwardly. Even if you return to your family and live a carefree life, you don't need to worry about anything in the future, and you can make up for all the things you have lost. You still don't want to find them? I don't want to. Feng Ling frowned impatiently. Why do you suddenly mention this? I'm unsociable and not used to interacting with too many people. It's not like you don't know that if I really return to that so-called family one day, whether it's liked or hated by others, I don't know how to face it, and it's very likely that I'll even lose my freedom. I don't want that kind of life. Besides, she couldn't really call him brother-in-law. This was the biggest knot in Feng Ling's heart. She didn't say it. She didn't know that she had already revealed such a big secret on the day she was drunk. She just retracted her leg from his thigh, turned around and sat upright on the sofa. I'll go to sleep after applying the medicine. Li Nanheng looked at her. When the little woman was about to get up, he abruptly held her wrist. The moment she looked back at him in pain because of the wound on her arm, the man's eyes immediately revealed a trace of apology. He let go of her arm, abruptly held her waist and forced her back to the sofa next to him. Feng Ling fell back onto the sofa and turned to look at him. What are you doing? Li Nanheng raised his hand and touched her slightly wet head, as though he was comforting her, but also as though he was comforting her. A person like you is indeed not suitable to live in that kind of place, especially someone like you who often likes to be alone and quiet. Others say that you're cold and unsociable, but I think you're just cautious and don't want to expose your true emotions. You were able to grow up smoothly until today, and you haven't been excluded or killed by anyone. Firstly, God has found you all the luck you lacked in the past, and secondly, it's all because of your uncompetitive personality. Why did he suddenly say this to her? Feng Ling had never thought about going home. The pair of jade pendants was also hidden in her suitcase, and she never planned to show them to anyone for the rest of her life. She didn't want to go home in the first place. In addition, her background might really be related to the Feng family. When she thought of Feng Mingzhu and the sensational news that Li Nanheng married the Feng family's daughter, her rejection of the Feng family became even stronger. There's nothing to fight over. Being able to live is more important than anything else, Feng Ling said in a low voice. At the same time she wanted to get up, but the man still held her and pressed her on the sofa. Chapter 1108. He asked, so even if it's the man you like, you'll give him away so easily. Have you ever thought of fighting for yourself? Fighting for what? Feng Ling squinted at him. I've never robbed other people's things, let alone other people's men. Besides, we're already married. Do I have to violate this moral bottom line? With that, she slapped his arm away and got up to leave. Li Nanheng, other people's men? He raised his eyebrows, watched the short-haired little woman walk to the bedroom with a hint of anger, and leaned against the sofa with a smile. Little fool. I've always been yours. The situation of the Feng family was complicated, and Feng Ling didn't want to mention her background. Obviously, she didn't even have the intention to let others know about it. What she insisted on couldn't be easily changed by him. How could he untie this knot for her? When he cast this net on her, he was afraid that he would really have to spend more effort. Feng Ling returned to the room. In fact, she couldn't sleep. Because she had just applied medicine, her body was faintly aching. She turned to see the bag on the bedside table and remembered that this seemed to be bought by Li Nanheng when he went out to eat just now. What on earth was it? She walked over, picked up the bag and pulled out a box inside. The bag was black. She didn't notice what was inside before. Now that the box was taken out, she saw that there was a picture of a cell phone on the outside. Recently, Feng Ling had been a transfer student in T University and saw that all the male and female students with good family backgrounds seemed to be using this cell phone. It was said that it was the latest model that was released last month, and it had many more new functions than the old model she used 2 or 3 years ago. And the color of the cell phone was also white, not the monotonous black she usually used. She opened the box and saw the cell phone inside. When she held it in her hand, it didn't feel very heavy. The cell phone was brand new and hadn't been opened before, so she needed to turn it on and set it up by herself. Looking at the thing in her hand, Feng Ling turned and walked out of the bedroom, only to see that the man was no longer in the living room. Hearing the sound of water boiling in the kitchen, Feng Ling walked over and saw the tall man standing in the kitchen boiling water. It seemed like he was preparing to help her brew the anti-inflammatory drugs in the medicine box. Perhaps after such a long time, except 3 years ago, when she accidentally let down her guard against him and really promised to marry him 3 years later, she had never properly responded to his kindness. Back then, she had denied everything that had happened between the two of them again and again. Even though he was still angry with her, he still seemed to treat her very well. Whether it was out of control or out of habit, it wasn't like she didn't notice it. Not to mention the fact that he had saved her time and time again, he would even take note of something as trivial as an old phone. In the eyes of others, Bosley might be a man harder than a rock that was difficult to approach, but in Feng Ling's eyes, what she saw was his flesh and blood and his warmth. She stood in front of the kitchen door with her phone and looked at the man's back. Are you boiling water? Li Nanheng didn't even look back. I can't sleep. Is there anything else I can do for you? When Feng Ling spoke, her voice was a little low. After all, she didn't know how to face the situation between him and her. Li Nanheng still didn't look back. Go back to the room to rest. If you can't sleep, play with the phone by yourself. Don't you need to study the new phone for a while? I won't argue with you about the phone. I'll accept the phone, but you don't need to help me change these things in the future. I just need one that can answer the phone. Feng Ling sharply saw that the man seemed to be making coffee while boiling water. She glanced at the coffee machine by his hand and walked over. Hearing her footsteps, Li Nanheng turned around and almost bumped into Feng Ling, who had just approached. She staggered back and almost dropped the new phone in her hand. She quickly clenched it hard in her palm. However, her movement was too fast and she was close to the cupboard. There was an empty coffee cup on the side, and the cup instantly fell to the ground with a crisp sound of shattering. Sorry. Seeing that she accidentally dropped something, Feng Ling subconsciously rushed to step back again. Seeing that her bare feet were about to step on the fragments, Li Nanheng's eyebrows twitched hard. He suddenly stretched out his long arm to hold her waist, pulled her back, and at the same time, kicked the scattered fragments on the ground a little further away from her. When did you learn to walk without shoes? It's winter in T-City. How can you walk out barefoot? The man frowned and looked down at her. Feng Ling lowered her head and pushed his arm away. She took 2 steps toward the wall and glanced down at her bare, fair and tender feet. She then turned to look at the man. There's floor heating in this hotel. The floor isn't cold. Even if it's not cold, you should wear shoes and develop the habit of walking barefoot. Are you like that woman Jin Wan, who often has a stomachache? Because Dr. Qin had treated Mrs. Mo, Dr. Qin must know that Mrs. Mo often had a stomachache because of her cold body, but Li Nanheng also knew. It was enough to show that these seemingly cold men would occasionally gossip about the troubles between women when they sat together in private. Feng Ling's white and tender toes curled up slightly and stood there looking at him. I'll go put them on in a while. Go now. I just came out to thank you. Feng Ling remembered that she almost stepped on the fragments and was suddenly held in his arms. For some reason, her heart trembled a little, and something uncontrollable spread in her. She squeezed the new cell phone in her hand and tried to find a reason to make her voice sound more normal. However, after all, she had just smashed a cup, and a pile of fragments were still on the ground, so her voice sounded a little weaker. Li Nanheng was expressionless. I want to thank you, but you smashed my cup? I'll call the front desk of the hotel and ask them to bring up 2 more cups for you. Feng Ling, who had always been cold and repulsed in front of this man, didn't know how to avoid embarrassment because she had accidentally caused trouble just now. Her voice was very low, and her eyes glanced at the fragments on the ground from time to time as if this matter was more serious than accidentally shooting a gun. Since she was a child, she had never made a rash mistake. This time she really didn't know what to do. Chapter 1109. When she said that she would ask the receptionist to send 2 more cups over, it was obvious that she had accidentally exposed her fear. Call the receptionist and ask for 2 cups. Don't you think it's more effective if you smile at me? Feng Ling raised her eyes and said, I smashed the cup and asked the receptionist to send 2. What's the problem? Then she suddenly realized what the man had just said and stared at him. Are you trying to blackmail me? The little woman's timid look suddenly disappeared and she glared at him. I'm here to help you boil water for medicine and make coffee. You smashed my cup, but now you're glaring at me? She didn't know how to refute for a moment. He raised his eyebrows. So it's my fault? It's my fault. Feng Ling lowered her head awkwardly. It's not your cup. Just pay the hotel for the cup when you check out. I'll pay for it myself. Li Nanheng said calmly, do you know how much the cup the hotel gave me is worth? Hearing his words, Feng Ling knew that this man was deliberately blackmailing her. She was a little annoyed. How much can it be worth? Is it an antique? It's not an antique, but there are a lot of stocks in this kind of hotel. The boss of the hotel is also good at taste. This kind of coffee cup is custom-made. There was originally a pair. One of them is now on the coffee table in the living room, and the other one was smashed by you just now. This pair of custom-made coffee cups is 5 times more expensive than the cell phone in your hand. Seeing her eyes widen unexpectedly, Li Nanheng found it funny and really laughed. Feng Ling felt that she seemed to be despised in front of this boss Li who was born with a golden spoon. Even if it was 5 times more expensive, she could afford it. In general, she had an apartment in Los Angeles and an apartment in Boston. After returning to China, Mr. Mo gave her a high salary. It was not like she didn't have money. She had worked hard for so many years. It was enough for her to survive in this world, okay? But seeing this man's expression, she was so angry that she didn't want to talk to him anymore. Just now, she shouldn't have inexplicably remembered how good he was to her because of this cell phone. She should always remember his shamelessness. Seeing that she was angry, the man waved his hand. Come here. Feng Ling originally wanted to return to the bedroom to put on her slippers, but when she heard his words, she turned to look at him and said unwillingly, What? There's a way that you don't have to compensate me. What is it? If it was 5 times more expensive, it would cost at least 20 to 30,000 yuan, which was almost equivalent to half a month's salary in High City. Thinking that she wouldn't go to 11 base in the future and didn't have many opportunities to make money, she instinctively said, Don't even think about confiscating my card. You've been holding my card when I was in the base, but now that I'm no longer a member of your base, I don't need you to help me plan any economic foundation. I'll make my own decisions and will never give it to you. When did you start to care so much about money? Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and there was a smile in his eyes. Now was not like when she was in 11 base, where she could earn at least 200,000 or 300,000 yuan from a mission. She had to be frugal. In the past 2 years in Boston, she had been relying on her work to be self-sufficient and knew how to live a frugal life. To put it simply, Feng Ling used to live in the jungle, the orphanage, and 11 base. Many of her knowledge existed on the surface, and she was somewhat blocked. But now she had basically understood everything. She would also care about things that normal people would care about, but she just didn't say it on the surface. She ignored him, walked around the small fragments on the ground, turned to find a broom and walked over to clean up the fragments. Seeing that she had come to clean up with injuries, she had just walked back to Li Nanheng's side when her wrist holding the broom was suddenly held by the man. Feng Ling only had time to raise her head to look at him in confusion, but at this moment, the man held her waist and pulled her back. In just 2 steps, he had pressed her against the side of the cupboard. The sound of boiling water behind them had stopped, but the sound of the coffee machine continued, and there was a small buzzing sound. Feng Ling subconsciously wanted to push him away, but the man directly held her wrist. Although he did not use much force, his fingertips still grazed a wound on her arm. She let out a low cry and was pulled into his arms. Just like this, her waist was pressed against the marble counter on the cupboard, but her front was pressed against the man's chest. Before she could make a sound of resistance, she was kissed. She was stunned for a few seconds and wanted to retreat. At the same time, she raised her hand to push his shoulder, but the man held her waist and brought her into his arms. In just 2 steps, he pressed her more firmly against the marble counter of the cupboard. Feng Ling? There was anger in her eyes. She glared at him, but the man did not see the shock and anger in her eyes. The previous few kisses were basically carried out after he was drunk. Finally, when she was sober, he naturally held her in his arms. How could he let her go? The man held her waist with one hand and raised the other to touch the back of her head. Their soft lips pressed against each other, and the man directly pried open her lips and teeth and invaded them. Their lips and tongues intertwined. It was a little gentle, a little ambiguous, and a little forceful. Feng Ling pushed Sang Sang and kept biting back, but in the end she was still restrained by the man's lips and tongue time and time again and had no way to retreat. At first, Feng Ling could still push him a few times, but then the pain in her arms and legs reminded her that if she used more force, the wound that had been applied with medicine might be torn open. In addition, there had always been a considerable gap between her and Li Nanheng's physical strength. The man's tongue firmly hooked into her teeth. Her body trembled and her mind went blank. Her hands tightly gripped the man's clothes to stand between him and the cupboard. When Li Nanheng let go, her breathing was so chaotic that even she was panicking. The man lowered his head. His warm, almost boiling breath sprayed into her ears, causing a layer of goosebumps to rise all over her body. She trembled and wanted to turn her head away, but the man's breath pressed against her sensitive ears. Li Nanheng, what on earth are you doing? Feng Ling forced herself to calm down. 5 minutes. Feng Ling. Chapter 11:10. She abruptly turned to ask him what he meant by those 3 words, only to see herself reflected in the man's eyes. She instantly choked on the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Take the initiative to kiss me once for 5 minutes. Take the initiative to kiss him? And kiss him for 5 minutes? There was only one thought in Feng Ling's mind. Impossible. Don't even think about it. Li Nanheng watched as her eyes widened in anger. He pursed his lips and chuckled lowly. Then sleep on my bed for a night? This, sleep for a night, had 2 meanings. It was clear that his words were not that simple. There was a huge ambiguity. Don't be too shameless. And I've been shameless for so many years. When I first started chasing you, you scolded me more than once. After being scolded by you for so many years, I have to carry out these 2 words so that I won't be wronged for no reason, right? Feng Ling couldn't take it anymore. She pushed him but failed. She frowned and said, Li Nanheng, don't kiss me again in the future and don't suddenly kiss me while talking. Before she could finish speaking, the man abruptly and accurately kissed her lips. She widened her eyes in anger and was about to struggle. In order to prevent her injuries from being pulled out in her anger, he let go in time. At the same time, he held the little woman who was leaning against the cabinet with anger all over her body to prevent her from falling down. At the same time he pressed against her ear and whispered, I'm afraid I can't do this. If I could do it, how could I have chased after a little iceberg like you? Feng Ling. At this moment, the man held her hand, intertwined his fingers with hers, and gently tugged her hand up. Why don't you give me a slap? And then find someone to customize a set of cups that are exactly the same as this one? He had already kissed her earlier. Just because she didn't agree to his shameless request to kiss him for 5 minutes, she was kissed for nothing? The man just hugged her like this, his head pressed against her ear, as if the feeling of imprisoning her in his arms was very comfortable. His voice was soft and lazy, his voice in her ear, just a word, made her heart tremble fiercely. She closed her eyes to calm herself down. I'll find someone to do it. Do you really have to go through so much trouble? The simplest way is right in front of you. Even if it's just perfunctory, I'll accept it. I don't accept it. Feng Ling's tone gradually cooled down. Li Nanheng, I really wonder how you can be so shameless. You threaten me with a cup. He smiled lazily. Maybe this is shameless in your eyes. Have you ever thought about how much effort I've put into you over the years, but in the end, how much scruples do you have? Even when you finally took a step toward me, you only took 1 step and then took 100 steps back. Feng Ling, I only spoiled you because I fell into your trap. I know that your feelings for me are not enough for you to surpass all rationality, but I still want to see when you can really let go of your heart and walk toward me. Feng Ling lowered her eyes and did not speak. It would be a lie to say that she was not touched, but the next moment she suddenly raised her foot and stepped hard on the man's foot. Unfortunately, she stepped barefoot. The attack was like throwing a ball of cotton at the man's face. The damage index was basically 0. The man did not speak after being stepped on by her. Instead, he suddenly pinched her chin and looked at her deeply. He said in a low voice, When will you really smile for me or cry for me from the bottom of your heart? Do you have to force me to press you on the bed before you can cry? Feng Ling's eyes flickered, but her heart was uncontrollably burning. She turned her eyes away and said, Do you still want me to put on my shoes? Her awkward action of changing the topic made the man suddenly chuckle lowly. It was obvious that he was laughing at her for not expressing her feelings even though she was clearly moved. He was laughing at how stupid her way of changing the topic was, and he didn't hide his laughter at all. However, it was indeed not good for her wound to keep being restrained like this. The man did not intend to keep forcing her at this time. Before the heat was up, he could only endure it. As soon as her body was free, Feng Ling took a step to the side and turned to walk out. However, she paused and said without looking back, I'll say it again. Don't kiss me forcefully in the future. The man said leisurely, I think you enjoy it. Feng Ling said hatefully, I was wondering why you insisted on keeping me here. When Mr. and Mrs. Mo kept me here, they probably didn't expect you to be so shameless. You clearly knew that I was injured and couldn't struggle too much. My body was electrocuted and now I have no strength. From the beginning you've been harboring evil intentions. Li Nanheng smiled slightly. Not only have I been harboring evil intentions from the beginning, I've been harboring evil intentions since you were 13 years old. Feng Ling, 13 years old? Was he talking about the time when she fell into his bathtub in the sauna room and accidentally saw the side of her chest when he tore open her clothes? The expression on her face changed several times in just a few seconds. It was rich and colorful. She wanted to curse but found that she couldn't say anything. However, when she heard the man's attitude as if he had long regarded her as a piece of meat in his wolf's mouth, she couldn't express her anger. Her face did not turn red, but the tips of her ears were about to drip blood. If she had known that one day in the future, this man would say such shameless words, she would never have gone to 11 base and would never have created any possibility or opportunity to contact him again. She couldn't find an excuse for a long time and finally fled. She ran back to the bedroom, put on her slippers and threw the new phone on the bed. She stood in the bedroom for a long time and seemed to hear the sound of the broken pieces being swept up in the kitchen. Feng Ling abruptly turned to walk out. She saw that the man was sweeping the floor in the kitchen and said, I'll sweep. Hearing the movement, the man turned to look at her. When he saw that she was indeed wearing shoes this time, he retracted his gaze and continued to sweep the floor. As he swept, he said mildly, "You'd better go play with your new phone. You're covered in injuries. You haven't even finished sweeping the floor. If you hurt your foot again, I'll have to apply medicine for your foot again. The gains don't make up for the losses." Feng Ling, now he knew that she was covered in injuries. Earlier, when he pressed her down and kissed her hard for a long time, why didn't he think that she was injured? Seeing that he really didn't need her to intervene, Feng Ling glanced at the other intact coffee cup on the coffee table, thought about the price of this cup and returned to the bedroom. Chapter 11:11. Feng Ling sat on the bed and turned on the new phone. While studying the usage of the new phone, she checked the various phone numbers in her previous phone's address book. She didn't have much interest in studying the new phone. She just changed the card, made sure that the address book was also synchronized and put the phone aside. Late at night, Feng Ling was very hesitant. She didn't know if she should stay or not. In fact, from a rational point of view, no matter what, she should leave. Because of the relationship between Li Nanheng and the Feng family, and because that man had clearly said that he wouldn't do anything to her, but he still kissed her forcefully in the kitchen. She felt that if she continued to stay here, more unexpected things would happen. But in her heart, there was a weak emotion that she couldn't understand that hindered her, telling her that she should stay here. She put her new cell phone aside to charge, got up and walked out of the bedroom. She saw the man coming out of the bedroom next to the suite. Perhaps because she was now living here with an injury, this man, who was a heavy smoker, seemed to have not smoked today. He had just taken a shower and looked refreshed. When he saw her coming out, he naturally asked her, "Have you taken your medicine?" Only then did Feng Ling remember that half an hour ago, he seemed to have said something to her outside the bedroom door, asking her to come out and drink the medicine that had been brewed. But she didn't come out at that time. She turned to look at the medicine on the coffee table, walked over, picked up the cup and drank the medicine while saying, I'll go back to Miss Wen's place after drinking the medicine." Dr. Wen is now at Miss Wen's place. Are you sure you want to go to her place? Jin Wan's apartment is currently occupied by Mo Jingshan. It's not convenient for you to go there. Li Nanheng came over, took the cold medicine from her hand, turned to the kitchen to pour it out, and then brewed a cup of hot water for her, reminding her to drink it while it was hot. When Feng Ling raised her hand to take it, he said, "My place is currently the most suitable place for you to stay." I don't think so. How many friends do you have in China? How many people do you know? You know that you can't go anywhere. It's safest and most appropriate to stay here. Here, the base, and I can contact you and support you at any time. We can see what's happening around you at any time, instead of waiting for you to call for help when something happens. No matter if their target is you or me, for them, you're the most suitable one to be attacked first since you're alone outside. The man continued unhurriedly, "Don't mention Jin Wan. Mo Jingshan asked you to stay, so he must have made a decision for you. It's best for you to recuperate here. As for Wen Liqing, the entanglement between her and her brother has just begun. You don't have to go to her place for the time being. I'm the only one who can take you in. I asked you to stay in a room alone and didn't ask you to sleep in my bed. You don't seem to have any reason to insist on leaving." There was nothing wrong with what he said. If it weren't for Feng Ling's consideration, she probably wouldn't have stayed. But the kiss he just gave her in the kitchen made her realize that things couldn't be so simple. At least she couldn't let him do this to her. She was afraid that she would lose the ability to resist in front of Li Nanheng. However, he had mentioned Miss Wen and Dr. Wen earlier. She drank half a cup of medicine and water. Her mouth was a little bitter, but fortunately, it tasted of medicine. She smacked her lips and asked, "The entanglement between Dr. Wen and Miss Wen has just begun. What do you mean?" A few days ago, Dr. Wen did go to her place to find her, but Miss Wen was not there at that time. I don't know what happened later, but I'm really surprised that Dr. Wen came to China. Dr. Wen was a man with very strong self-control. In addition, his professional nature made him look like a super abstinent man like Dr. Qin. He was also good at hiding his personality and emotions. Unlike Li Nanheng, who was indifferent to the outside but honest to the inside, Dr. Wen was definitely not honest to the inside and outside. He was definitely the kind of flower on the high mountain that people couldn't even reach out their hands to touch. In her eyes, Wen Liqing was an excellent, beautiful, well-educated, gentle, kind and enthusiastic woman. This kind of woman was definitely a goddess in the eyes of any man. No matter in appearance, family background or personality, Wen Liqing was definitely the best. Li Nanheng looked at her. Li Nanheng looked at her. The relationship between Wen Linhan and the Wen family is not as simple as it seems on the surface, and his feelings for Wen Liqing are not as cold and unmoved as others think. On the contrary, he is too restrained and forbearing, and everything is as if he is standing in front of the operating table. However, in his more than 20 years of life, the only person who has exceeded his original path is his sister, and the person who forced him to deviate from the path is also his sister. He wants to stick to the original path, but after so many years, his heart is no longer on that line, and it is only a matter of time before his feelings override his reason. Feng Ling, she really didn't know enough about the relationship between Dr. Wen and Wen Liqing. However, during this period of time when she lived with Miss Wen, she could feel that although Miss Wen tried her best not to show any emotional changes, Feng Ling could often see that Wen Liqing's eyes were red when she woke up in the morning. She didn't know whether it was red or because she didn't sleep well. Feng Ling didn't know much about love. Although she asked a few questions with concern, Wen Liqing didn't say anything, so she didn't continue to ask. She could only promise that she could accompany her every time she went back. But speaking of which, after Dr. Wen appeared a few days ago, Feng Ling really didn't see Miss Wen again. Did Li Nanheng mean that Dr. Wen had been in T-City recently? Hadn't he left yet? Usually, he was so busy that it was impossible for others to shake his original work and daily arrangements. Now he left all the work and things at hand? He specially stayed in T-City? Seeing that she didn't move, Li Nanheng softened his tone and said in a low voice, "Don't worry, living here is safer than anywhere else except for being kissed by me occasionally. What happened in the kitchen just now was out of my control. If I were really such a beast, your whole body would have been mine long ago." Feng Ling, she snorted with an ambiguous look. "What should I do to be yours?" Chapter 11-12. Then she drank up all the medicine and water in the cup. When she looked up at him again, she saw that the man was just looking at her meaningfully. The hint in his eyes was clearly related to what he said just now. So what happened on Roger's Pass back then? She was really wronged for being slept with. Feng Ling's chest instantly became sullen. She wanted to throw a pillow at this man again. She wondered if she had been cursed by Li Nanheng. In the past she clearly wouldn't get angry, but now why was it so easy for her to provoke her? Feng Ling returned to the bedroom, picked up the phone that was charging, and suddenly saw an unread text message. She opened it and saw that it was from Wen Liqing. "Wen Liqing, Feng Ling, where have you been these days? I was allergic to alcohol 2 days ago, so I had to have my stomach pumped and had an injection in the hospital. It took me a few days to get out of the hospital. When I came back, I found that you hadn't come back for 2 days. I called you but you didn't answer my call. Did you go back to the dormitory of T University with Mrs. Mo?" Feng Ling saw that this text message had only been sent 3 or 4 minutes ago, and she called Wen Liqing back. "Feng Ling, where are you?" Feng Ling sat on the bed. "I'm outside. I'm fine. Is your alcohol allergy so serious? How are you now?" "It's okay. I'm a doctor myself. What can I do?" Wen Liqing said softly, then thought for a while and said, "Since you are outside, Feng Ling, can you help me with something? Can you help me contact someone?" Before she finished speaking, Feng Ling suddenly heard the sound of the door being opened, and then Wen Liqing suddenly stopped speaking as if she was afraid of being heard and didn't continue. "What's the matter? If it's inconvenient to talk, send me a message," Feng Ling said softly. "Okay." Wen Liqing's tone on the other side suddenly became serious, and then she gently said "good night," and hung up the phone. On the other side of the phone, Wen Liqing turned to look at the man who pushed the door open. Wen Linhan came in with a weather-beaten body. When he came in, he saw that she was curled up on the sofa, holding a cell phone and calling someone. "Who's calling?" Feng Ling, after answering, Wen Liqing raised her eyes to look at the man who walked in the door. She stared at him for a few seconds, then lay on the sofa as if she didn't feel anything. She silently pulled the blanket to cover her legs, closed her eyes, and pretended to sleep as if he didn't exist. Wen Linhan watched her every move after entering the door, closed the door, and did not speak to disturb the silence in the room at this moment. Wen Liqing closed her eyes and leaned against the sofa for a while. Because of the man's silent gaze, she finally opened her eyes and looked at him expressionlessly. "Shouldn't you go back to the United States now? Your fiancé is still waiting for you. Your work and your patients are still waiting for you. I, an insignificant person, have already troubled you for more than a week. Now that I'm fine, you can go." Wen Linhan did not speak. "Also, I promise that such a thing will never happen again. Don't think too much about it. I only drank because I enjoyed myself, not because of you. Everything was because of me. I didn't intend to put any pressure on you, nor was I forcing you by injuring myself. Wen Liqing lowered her eyes as she spoke. She didn't want to see his expression, so she just leaned against the sofa and spoke. Then she frowned slightly because of his silent attitude after entering the door. Before leaving the United States, she still remembered the words she said when she grabbed his collar and questioned him with red eyes. She cried uncontrollably and begged him not to abandon her like this and begged him to face his feelings. What did he say to her at that time? Every word was like a cold knife grinding on the top of her heart, and now her heart still trembled when she thought of it. She stroked her head and turned to look at him. Brother, I've already said that you don't have to think that everything I do now is for you to see. It's been almost 10 years. I apologize to you for all the childish, willful and irrational things I have done for you. I apologize for affecting your normal life for so long, and I apologize for pestering you for so many years. Perhaps if I hadn't pestered you for so many years, you would have been able to marry your fiancé 3 or 4 years ago. It's all my fault. She continued, you don't have to stay here with me. From now on, I won't make my presence felt in front of you. I won't force you to stay. You can go. When Linhan looked at her indifferently and didn't speak. There was a floor heater in the room which was very warm. He casually took off his windbreaker and tugged at the collar of the white shirt inside. Then he undid 3 buttons at the same time. His cold and aloof demeanor instantly became much more easygoing. At the same time, his gaze fell directly on her cold face, which seemed to have made up her mind to abandon love. Just because of one sentence from me, you can torment yourself to this state, and you still dare to say that you're not putting on an act for me to see? If I hadn't come in time this time and sent you to the hospital before your allergic symptoms completely broke out, do you know what would have happened to you now? Do you want your neck and face to be swollen for the rest of your life? Or do you want to be sent to the emergency room for surgery if your respiratory tract is seriously asphyxiated? Or do you want to quietly find a corner where no one knows and get drunk and slap me in the face with your pathetic way of letting go? And then impose on me the crime of forcing my sister to die? His tone was still very cold, so cold that Wen Liqing's heart ached fiercely. She abruptly turned her eyes. You think too much. Wen Linhan sneered. You torment yourself like this. How can I not think about it? Do you really think I have no heart? Really? Wen Liqing said lightly, I really thought you had no heart. It turns out that you will also take my affairs to heart. It turns out that you will also think about my affairs carefully, instead of always just throwing me aside as a mischievous child, ignoring all my emotions and always telling me 2 words, don't make trouble. When Linhan frowned coldly because of the provocation in her words and looked at her sitting motionless on the sofa. She was indeed the pearl of the Wen family. No matter in all aspects, she bore too much expectations and attention from the Wen family. A girl who was so excellent that no one could find any flaws in her, but because of him she repeatedly became decadent. Now she was leaning lazily on the sofa, which was obviously an indulgence after despair. Chapter 11-13. He saw that she had been standing there since she entered the door. It seemed that he came to see her just because he was worried that something would happen to her again. In fact, what could happen to her? If she was an extreme person, something would have happened to her long ago. She didn't think too much about the drinking incident, but she didn't expect to be seen by him. It seemed that she was threatening him with death. She wouldn't. If she really loved someone, how could she treat him in such a childish and coercive way? He didn't want to approach her, but he didn't leave or return to the United States because he was worried. Wen Liqing had been resting at home for the past 2 days, so she was always sleepy. Leaning against the sofa sickly, she wanted to go to sleep, but she couldn't because he was standing here. She wanted to ignore him but couldn't ignore his existence at all. I don't need you to keep an eye on me. I've said that I won't pester you anymore. You can rest assured. I've never said such words before. I've never given up. Now that I've decided to give up, I'll really give up. I'll do what I say. I'll never pester you again. Gu Yuxing looked at Gu Yuxing and said, Dr. Wen, you can go. When Linhan still didn't respond. When Liqing was silent for a while, suddenly lifted the blanket on her body and walked off the sofa. She walked up to him. Her footsteps were still a little unsteady, but she still walked up to him with a cold face and glanced at the door not far behind him. Wen Linhan, do you want me to invite you out personally? He didn't say anything. He lowered his eyes to look at her when she suddenly approached him. His gaze was very calm and his expression was cold and forbearing. She didn't want to care about what kind of emotions and storms were hidden in the depths of his dark eyes. She didn't bother to peek into his heart anymore. When she was in love with him, even if it was just a word he said or a few words he wrote, She would think about it for a long time, wanting to know if he had those feelings for her. Later, after thinking about it for a long time, she found that none of his words seemed to have anything to do with her. It was she who forced herself to play. Dr. Wen. Wenlu looked at him and raised his finger to the door. I'll call you brother again, my dear brother, who used to have a blood relationship with me, but now the truth has come to light. Brother, who has no blood relationship with me at all, please leave, lest you be seen by others here and let them be suspicious. If you continue to stay here, I'm afraid that others will think that I'm forcing you to do something. Since I'm the one who took the initiative from the beginning and I've been pestering you for so many years, I don't know what I've experienced over the years, and I don't know if I'm destined to be enemies with you. Since I've made you so disgusted and painful, and I've caused so many troubles in your life, I'll never take another step towards you in the future. With that, Wen Liqing took a step back and looked at his cold and tense face. As you wish, I have regained my senses. I will slowly heal my wounds by myself. If not, as you once said, I may not find a suitable man to fall in love with. Senior brother has always treated me well, so I should face up to his feelings for me, fall in love with him, and completely remove you from my heart. Goodbye. Wen Liqing was tired of talking. She pointed to the door behind him. If possible, I will never see you again. Even if I go back to the United States in the future, I will not look for you. Anyway, you have established your own family and rarely come back to the Wen family. You will never appear in my world again. We will not affect each other and will not see each other. You are a madman. This sentence came out of Wen Linhan's seemingly calm mouth, and his voice was so cold that it seemed to be able to freeze the air in the entire room. A smile appeared on Wen Liqing's face in an instant, and she looked at him with a sneer. Yes, I am a madman, I admit it. If I am not crazy, how could I fall in love with my own brother at the age of 16? If I'm not crazy, how can I only see you in my mind and heart for nearly 10 years from my teens to my 20s? What you said was right. I'm just too short-sighted. I have such good life resources and a lot of good times. Why should I waste all my beauty and enthusiasm on you, Wen Linhan? Wen Liqing said and pointed to the door again. Now please go out. Wen Linhan narrowed his eyes, looked at her serious face, and then looked at her figure, which seemed to be getting thinner and thinner than before. She was wearing a set of pink pajamas with a white rabbit pattern on it. She looked simple yet a little playful, but her body was too thin under the clothes, making her clothes look a little empty. She was like this in the hospital emergency room that day. Only when her shirt was unbuttoned did he realize that she hadn't had a good meal since she came to China. She was already very thin when she was in the United States, and now she was even thinner than when she was in the United States. It was as if a gust of wind would blow her away. Madman. He muttered again, but his voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. Wen Liqing thought he was scolding her, but it didn't sound like he was scolding her. She looked up at him. I have said what I should say. How long do you want to mock me? I'm already like this and you still want to beat me to the point of no return? So what if I loved you? Wen Linhan, do I have to be sent to hell by you because I love you? I want to escape from your shackles. I can finally leave as you wish. You should be more self-aware and don't appear in front of me again. I can't chase you away no matter how hard I try. You even scolded me. What are you trying to do? Do you really have to force me to the point of insanity before you feel comfortable? Go. Go now. Go now. Seeing that he didn't move, Wen Liqing glared at him angrily. Go. Little Qing. Don't call me. Don't call me Little Qing again. You are not my brother but also my lover. This word is not something you can say casually. Wen Liqing looked at him coldly. Go. Go now. Wen Linhan, don't force me to throw you out. Go. Chapter 11:14. Seeing that he didn't move and just stood there looking at her like a stone stick, Wen Liqing was really fed up with his tepid attitude. Wen Liqing was really fed up with his tepid attitude. She angrily stretched out her hand and pushed him hard. She hit him hard and cried, Go away. Get out. Wen Linhan, don't show up again. I don't love you anymore. The back of her waist suddenly tightened, and before Wen Liqing could see anything clearly, she was suddenly pulled into his arms. The man suddenly raised a hand to hold the back of her head, pulled her forward and kissed her hard on the lips. The touch on her lips was so strong and fast that she didn't have a chance to react. She was caught off guard. She was petrified in an instant. Her tearful eyes were wide open, but there was shock and confusion hidden in her eyes. She didn't understand what was going on from beginning to end. Wen Linhan was kissing her? This had never happened in nearly 10 years. She once took the opportunity to take care of him when he had a fever to secretly lean against the bedside to kiss him, but she was careful not to be discovered by him. Or when she acted coquettishly with him a few years ago, she rubbed his face against his face, asked for a hug in his arms, buried her face in his neck, and touched his chin and even his Adam's apple with her lips from time to time in order to seduce him, but he pushed her away. Or perhaps, when their lips touched, it was just an unintentional collision, although most of the time, it was slightly intentional on her part. But in any case, when Lin Han had never kissed her. Every time she accidentally kissed him, he would avoid her expressionlessly and warn her not to be too obsessed with him. He never did. He never kissed her. He never kissed her like this. Even the man's kiss ravaged her lips as if he was complaining about something. He lost his usual calmness and gentleness, and lost the demeanor that should belong to Dr. Wen. He just entangled her lips and tongue fiercely. Before she had any preparation, he forcibly opened her teeth and kissed her deeply without restraint. Wen Liqing didn't recover at all. Her brain seemed to be blank and she was shocked stiff. Feeling that the woman in his arms hadn't recovered for a long time, Wen Linhan's heart softened. He held her tighter in his arms, imprisoned her firmly in his arms, and sucked her lips from intense to gentle. When her eyes gradually regained focus and her consciousness gradually recovered, she suddenly raised her hand to push him away. Wen Linhan's hand clasped her waist tightly, and he bent down to increase the intensity of the kiss. Wen Liqing moaned and her body was also struggling, but he still didn't let go. When she struggled violently, Wen Linhan suddenly bit her lips and said hoarsely as if warning her, "Isn't this what you want? You used all the methods you could think of just to break through all the obstacles and be with me? Since this is what you want, you don't have to torture yourself like this anymore. Just tell me what you want. I've never been unable to give you anything since we were young. Since you only want me, fine, I'll give it to you." Wen Liqing didn't understand what he meant. The man in front of her looked at her with deep eyes. She only felt that her lips were kissed painfully. She frowned and put her hands against his chest, trying to push him away and break free, but he suddenly picked her up by the waist. At the moment when she was picked up, Wen Liqing's mouth was free. She struggled and said, "Wen Linhan, what are you doing? Let me down. What else do you want?" Wen Linhan couldn't tell what he was thinking, but his eyes were cold. He carried her all the way to the bedroom. The man who had always been gentle and calm kicked open the bedroom door in front of him, carried her in, threw her on the bed under Wen Liqing's panicked eyes, and then suddenly bent down and pressed her under his body, firmly imprisoned her, and pressed her hands above her head. From beginning to end, he didn't show any gentleness. You let go of me?" Wen Liqing was really panicked after being pressed on the bed. She had never seen Wen Linhan like this. "Let go of me. Let go of me." The man imprisoned her firmly, looked down at her and gnashed his teeth. "I'll give you whatever you want. I'll satisfy you one by one. Wen Liqing, you really have the ability to force me to this point. Xiaoqing, you've been jumping around in front of me like this for more than 20 years. You really have guts. Wen Linhan, get up." "Yeah." The man suddenly clasped her wrists above her head. She felt that her wrists were in pain and her eyes were about to turn red. The man suddenly sealed her lips again at this moment, and at the same time, dragged her hand to the collar of his shirt. "Come on, take what you want." Wen Liqing was completely shocked and trembled all over. Her hand trembled and stopped on his collar. She felt the man's hand pressing her hand there, but she didn't dare to touch it as if she had been electrocuted. She wanted to pull her hand out and dodge, but he grabbed it firmly and pressed it against his collar again. "I don't want it." Wen Liqing struggled desperately under him. "Let go of my hand. Get up. Wen Linhan, get away. That's not what I want. What I want is..." At this moment, the man leaned over and breathed in her ear. His hoarse voice carried a certain warning and coldness that she had never seen from him. "There's only one chance, Xiaoqing. Since you've been pestering me for nearly 10 years, I'll make you regret it if I don't satisfy you once. People say that you can't let go if you can't get it. I'll let you get it once. Will you really learn to be obedient? Isn't this the person you want? Come, I'll give it to you. Come and take it. I'll give it all to you, Wen," Wen Linhan said as he grabbed her hand again. One hand was not enough, so he pulled both of her hands to his collar and forced her to pull the delicate buttons of his shirt collar. Wen Liqing lay there stiffly because of his actions. Her hands seemed to be controlled by him. She couldn't resist and couldn't say a word. When the man pulled the collar open a little and saw the man's collarbone and chest, she panicked and tried to pull her hand out, shaking her head hard. No, it was not like this. She didn't think so. She didn't want to force him to this point. This was not what she wanted. Chapter 11:15. She didn't want to force him to this point. This was not what she wanted. She drank that day just to say goodbye to the past completely. She knew that she was allergic to alcohol, but there were so many friends present at that time, most of whom were doctors. She knew that she would be fine. In her life, she had never been a willful person who let others worry about her. She had only indulged herself once. Her life had always been like this. She just wanted to take this opportunity to get drunk. Her heart was so painful and uncomfortable, but she didn't even have the qualification to get drunk. It was really a grieving. With so many doctors present, she couldn't die. She really didn't want to force him. When Lin Han ignored her red eyes and full of resistance, bent down and kissed her ear hard, causing her to tremble all over. When Liqing had no strength to resist at all. Her hands had been trying very hard to break free from his palm, but she couldn't. Until when Lin Han suddenly let go of her hand and directly sealed her lips again. The strong and deep kiss swept all her nerves. Because of such a kiss, she felt as if the world was full of bursts of white light in front of her. She was shocked and stimulated as if the world was spinning. Her eyes were red with grievance and pain, but the black eyes of the man on top of her were bursting with dangerous light. She wanted to escape, but her body was completely pressed on the bed. The man on top of her had never looked at her like this, nor had he ever treated her like this. He coldly narrowed his eyes and looked at her nervously and helplessly. At the moment when her nervous chest kept heaving up and down, he suddenly pulled open her buttoned pajamas. The front of the pajamas suddenly felt a chill because of being pulled open. She exclaimed in fright, but he kissed her hard again at the moment when she exclaimed. The strength of this kiss was so firm and heavy that when Liqing frowned hard, but she couldn't push him away. She began to have an instinctive resistance to something that she had been looking forward to for many years but had never experienced. She wanted to get up and push him away, but her body was as tense as a bow. Before she succeeded in pushing him away, when Lin Han had pressed her hands back to the bed and kissed her fiercely. When he kissed her collarbone, when Liqing was so anxious that her tears slid down the corners of her eyes. Unable to resist, she could only lie on the bed and let him do whatever he wanted. She could only sob and say, "Brother, don't do this, don't do this." When Lin Han didn't seem to hear her. When she couldn't stop crying, trembling under him and choking with sobs, he pressed on her and whispered hoarsely in her ear, "Just say what you want. Before leaving the United States, you came to my room in the middle of the night and accused me of my indifference again and again. The letter you left in my mailbox was also full of tears of blood. Do you think I don't know what you want? I'll give it to you now, all of it. Is that enough? Satisfied?" When Liqing raised her eyes and looked at him accusingly. But before he could speak, he suddenly felt a certain part of his lower body. There was an obvious change. She opened her mouth but was too shocked to say anything. She could only look at him with fear and disbelief. Did he have feelings for her? Then he used to say that they were just brother and sister and that he would never have feelings for her beyond that of a sister. What did those words mean? There seemed to be a flash of frustration in Lin Han's eyes. He didn't want to see her eyes again, so he suddenly turned her face and kissed her lips again. She was so anxious that her eyes turned red. She struggled to avoid him, but he still firmly clasped her chin. The kiss became deeper and deeper and his breathing became heavier and heavier. At this moment, the door outside was suddenly knocked on. When Liqing hurriedly murmured as if she heard a life-saving symphony, reminding him that someone was knocking on the door. She remembered that senior brother said that he had nothing to do today and would come to see her. Now it was almost time for senior brother to arrive. When Liqing couldn't concentrate on Lin Han's deep kiss. Even this man who was usually gentle and elegant seemed to be full of irritation at this moment. She raised her hand to pinch his arm hard, and when Lin Han bit her lips even harder as if suffering a backlash. Suddenly, when Lin Han's hand continued to unbutton her pajamas that had already been opened. The moment when Liqing felt a chill in front of her body, her eyes widened in disbelief, and her body suddenly tightened. She had just successfully pulled out her hand and pushed his shoulder, but now she suddenly grabbed his shoulder tightly and her eyes were full of panic. Don't, brother." When Liqing was really scared. She looked helplessly at the man who was usually as calm as ice but now almost went crazy with her. Don't do this. I'm scared." The fear in Liqing's heart had reached the extreme. She trembled under him, and the focus in her eyes was almost unfocused. Her messy long hair was wrapped around her neck and cheeks, and sweat was intertwined. She was full of fear and helplessness. When Lin Han looked at her coldly and sneered. The more afraid she was, the harder he kissed her. When he touched her chest, when Liqing suddenly clenched his shoulders hard with both hands and her nails almost embedded into his shoulders. Don't. Isn't this what you want? No. She turned her body slightly, wanting to avoid his hand, but he pressed down on her body. He bit her lips as if he didn't give her any leeway, and then kissed her sweaty, white neck. His hands didn't stop moving. Wen Liqing was a little ashamed. There had never been any intimacy between her and him except for the touch of lips. In the past 10 years, everything had been stuck at the level of siblings, and they had never gone beyond that. If something really happened here today, would she be happy? Was this really what she wanted? What she wanted was for him to really like her, not just the relationship between brother and sister, but to really like her. If he did all the things he wanted to do because of love, she would definitely accept it. After all, she was already in her 20s and was not a little girl. There was nothing wrong with it. But now, not now. He had been completely forced by her to the point that he had lost his rationality. He had even acted with vengeance and viciousness. This was not love. Chapter 11:16. The knocking on the door outside became more and more urgent. Wen Linhan had no intention of letting her go but bullied her even more fiercely. He pressed the woman's soft body under him and asked himself again and again in his mind. He wanted to see her again and again, but he also wanted to know how she was doing. She cried her heart out in front of him, begging him not to get engaged to someone else. The letters she left in the mailbox were like knives, tormenting his sanity. Who was crazy? When Linhan closed his eyes and once again occupied her lips that had been kissed red and swollen, sucking mercilessly with a force that almost robbed all her breath. Wen Liqing trembled helplessly under him. When Linhan's hand invaded her open clothes again, Wen Liqing suddenly shrank and abruptly turned her head away, but the man on top of her bit her ear, as if he had been forced to the extreme, or as if he was taking revenge when he was venting his emotions. She had no strength to resist at all. Her eyes were red and her tears fell on the bed. She choked and said, "Why are you doing this, brother? Why are you doing this to me?" When Linhan did not speak for a while. After a long time, he seemed to barely suppress the desire in his body that was about to collapse. He suddenly put his hands on both sides of her body and slowly lifted himself up. He lowered his black eyes to look at the clear fear and sadness that flashed through her eyes. He still lowered his voice and said coldly, "I should be the one asking you, why do you like me? Why do you force me into a desperate situation step by step?" Wen Liqing sobbed. "I just said that I will never force you again. I will stay far away from you in the future. I will never." "It's too late," the man suddenly said. His voice was very soft, so soft that she thought she had heard wrongly. She stared at him blankly, but he stared into her eyes. His voice was very low, but even though it was soft and low, it still forced its way into her ears. Wen Liqing's breathing suddenly stagnated, and she looked at the emotion that flashed in his eyes in disbelief. "When you were 18 years old, I could still tell you rationally that everything was impossible. When you were 23 years old, I told you to be rational. I would never fall in love with you and told you to be my little sister. When you were 25 years old, I was almost dragged into the abyss by you. Now, when you are almost 26 years old, you left me such a long letter. You cut my heart piece by piece. Do you think it's too late for you to retreat now?" When Linhan looked down at her. "I can't give you a reason to hide and cry by yourself, nor can I watch you drink so much even though you know you will be allergic to alcohol. You indulge yourself, but I can't watch you destroy yourself. If you really want to sink into depravity." When Linhan looked into her eyes. Although his face was calm and cold, he said seriously and clearly, "Don't hurt yourself anymore." Tears fell from Wen Liqing's eyes. Don't hurt herself anymore? So in the end it was because of what she did that he was forced to this point. His words were full of his heartache, but he didn't respond to her feelings. In the end he was still forced to this point by her. Wen Liqing closed her eyes. She suddenly remembered a Hong Kong and Taiwan movie she watched when she was a child, in which Shaoqing seduced Fahai in front of Buddha. In the end it was just because she couldn't get it and he couldn't get it. What he was loyal to was the rationality in his heart. She sniffled and wanted to laugh but couldn't. She wanted to cry but couldn't. "From now on you'd better behave yourself and don't cause any more trouble. Our family already knows what you've been thinking about me for so many years. Don't let yourself get hurt again. Work hard. Whether you're in the United States or in China, live a good life. If you want to be with me openly, you should make yourself stronger and be able to withstand all the rumors and slanders from the outside world. You shouldn't be like this, where a little bit of emotional frustration can knock you down." When Liqing opened her eyes and looked at him, but she didn't speak for a long time. "Do you understand?" When Linhan looked down at her and stared straight into her eyes. "What you should learn is to grow up. Her lips were still a little numb, but his words were so cold that it felt like an iceberg had fallen on her body. He was just reminding her that she was not mature enough, reminding her that she was not strong enough, reminding her that she had driven herself to the brink of collapse because of these trivial matters, and in turn she would cause him no peace. Wen Liqing lay there motionless, her hands clenching the quilt under her stiffly. Looking at the man's open shirt collar and his collarbone, her mind buzzed. The knocking on the door outside became louder and louder, and even Wen Liqing's cell phone on the sofa outside had already rung at this time. Wen Liqing still lay motionless on the bed. She didn't have the strength to get up and could only look at him almost blankly. Wen Linhan, however, turned his eyes away and couldn't bear to look at her eyes anymore. He suddenly got up, left her body, got out of bed and walked out. Although she didn't have any strength, she knew that the person who came now was probably the senior brother. If the senior brother saw Wen Linhan when he entered the door, she didn't know what would happen. Wen Liqing hurriedly struggled to sit up on the bed, barely gathered her clothes, got out of bed and staggered out quickly. Wen Linhan walked over and opened the door. The senior brother standing outside the door looked at him and paused. Then he saw Wen Linhan's clothes, which were not as neat as usual, and seemed to see some wrinkles that had just been pressed out. The senior brother frowned slightly. "Dr. Wen?" Wen Linhan was expressionless and his eyes were cold. "What's the matter? Is Xiaoqing inside?" the senior asked directly. As he spoke, he glanced at the living room behind him. "I just called her and heard her phone ringing. Where is she?" "She is inside, but it's not convenient for her to see you today," Wen Linhan said lightly and was about to close the door blankly. However, the door was suddenly blocked by the senior brother at this moment, and at the same time, he looked at the man in front of him coldly. "Dr. Wen, it was Xiaoqing who agreed to let me come to see her on the phone. She just called me less than an hour ago. Is it convenient for her to see me now? I think Dr. Wen is not in a good state. Is something wrong with Xiaoqing? Let me in and take a look. As long as I'm sure she's okay, I'll leave immediately. I'm here. What can happen to her?" Wen Linhan's cold eyes were full of impatience. He glanced at his hand blocking the door. "Take your hand away." Chapter 11:17. The senior brother stood there and didn't move. At this time he saw the woman coming out of the bedroom inside. At first glance he saw Wen Liqing's messy long hair, her red and swollen eyes, and her lips that looked much rosier than usual. At the same time he saw that although the front of her pajamas was held by her hands, if he looked carefully, he could still see that a button had fallen out. The woman who was usually spoiled by her family and friends seemed to have encountered the biggest change in her life at this moment. She was so embarrassed that any man could guess what she had just experienced. The senior brother's eyes turned cold in an instant, and he threw a punch at Wen Linhan's face. Wen Linhan glanced at him calmly, raised his hand to block his punch and looked at him coldly. "Mind your manners." "Mind my manners? King bullied Xiaoqing like this. When did you ever mind your manners?" The senior brother retracted his hand angrily and punched at him again. This time, Wen Linhan didn't raise his hand to take it but took a step back. The senior brother's punch missed, so he raised his hand to support himself on the door and rushed in quickly. Wen Liqing had just walked out of the bedroom. She looked blankly at the senior brother who just entered the door and then frowned when she saw the tense atmosphere between the two of them. The senior brother glared at Wen Linhan. "What did you do to her just now?" Wen Linhan didn't answer but looked back at Wen Liqing who was standing there blankly. "What did I do to you? Do you want to tell him yourself?" As soon as Wen Liqing heard this, she looked at the man standing there with a cold face in disbelief. He clearly knew that she was about to give in under the gentle attack of her senior for so many years. She had just said that she wanted to turn around and look at the people behind her. Her senior had been treating her the same for so many years. If she had any conscience, she would also turn around and look at him. She would cherish the people around her who were truly good to her. He knew that she was going to be with the senior brother soon. But Wen Linhan, who always wished he could never have anything to do with her, stood here and said such ambiguous words. Wen Liqing turned to look at the man whose face was full of anger. "Senior brother." The senior brother only heard the fear and grievance in her intermittent and somewhat hoarse voice, and suddenly punched Wen Linhan again. This time, Wen Linhan didn't dodge but let him punch him in the face. As he took a step back, the senior brother rushed forward like crazy, grabbed his shirt collar hard and pushed him to the ground fiercely. He didn't care whether Wen Linhan was good at martial arts or not. Anyway, Wen Linhan didn't resist so he could beat him up. Seeing that the senior brother pressed Wen Linhan to the ground and was about to punch him again, Wen Liqing staggered and hurriedly ran over to pull them apart. "Senior brother, don't fight, don't fight," the senior pushed her away forcefully. "Go away. This sanctimonious beast in human clothing. He said she was his sister, but he was such a bastard in private. I must beat him to death." "Senior brother?" Wen Liqing was thrown back. Seeing that when Linhan really didn't fight back, his chin was punched again, and his clean face looked like a different person because of the red and blue corners of his mouth. The senior brother who had always been patient with her was furious at this moment. She hurriedly pulled his hand. "Don't fight. Don't fight. Go away, little Qing." The senior brother waved her away again. Although when Linhan was a doctor, he was a man of more than 1.8 meters tall with an absolutely perfect figure. If he really fought, not everyone could be his opponent. After all, he was tall and strong, but he didn't resist at all. Wen Liqing fell to the ground. Seeing the scene of Wen Linhan being beaten, she suddenly realized that she seemed to be really wrong. She shouldn't disturb his peaceful life. She shouldn't force all her embarrassment on him. If it weren't for her, how could he have come to this point? Wen Liqing suddenly got up and rushed over again. This time, she directly hugged the senior brother who was riding on Wen Linhan and hugged him tightly with both hands. "Senior brother, please don't hit me. It's all my fault. I messed up my good life like this. It's all my fault. Please don't hit him. Please, senior brother, take me away, I'll go with you. Please take me away, senior brother." The senior brother suddenly lowered his head and looked at Wen Liqing, who was crying hard in his arms. Lying on the ground, Wen Linhan's eyes flickered slightly because of her begging the senior brother to take her away. He watched her crying and trembling in someone else's arms. "Don't hit me, really, please, take me away now," Wen Liqing said, holding the senior brother's arms and body with both hands. "I don't need to pack anything. I'll go with you right away, little Qing." "Senior brother, I figured it out. I'll forget him. I've really figured it out." Seeing her crying uncontrollably, the senior brother's anger gradually dissipated because of her tight hug and crying. He raised his hand and put it on her shoulder. "Okay, I'll take you away." With that, he no longer looked at the man on the ground, suddenly got up, and at the same time helped Wen Liqing, who was crying and trembling weakly, up. He put his arm around her shoulder and walked out. When he walked to the door, he took off his coat and put it on her shoulder. "Let's go downstairs first. I just parked the car outside. Get in the car. It won't be cold. I'll take you to a place to settle down first." Until the two of them went out the door was slammed heavily outside. The room was quiet. When Linhan lay on the ground, motionless, but the heaving of his chest gradually intensified. When they got downstairs, the senior brother opened the car door and saw Wen Liqing standing there and didn't move forward. "Look at how timid you are. When you are not in front of Wen Linhan you can say anything, but when you meet Wen Linhan you become timid. Just now you were so brave in front of him. Didn't you say you would go with me? Now you don't want to go?" Wen Liqing, "Senior brother, okay, don't explain. I know what kind of person you are." The senior sighed. "Get in the car first. If someone else saw you in such a sorry state, they might think that something happened to you. After all, he's your brother and also the person you love. What happens is between the two of you. I can't control it. You've already hit him and vented your anger. Now that you're downstairs, if you go back now, are you sure you'll still have a place to put your face?" Chapter 11:18. Wen Liqing was a little embarrassed to be seen through. She put on his coat and stood outside the car door asking, "Then where should I go now?" "Anyway, you are a visiting professor of the medical school. You don't look like a professor at all. Find a hotel to stay in and tidy yourself up. We have a joint lecture tomorrow and a clinical consultation in a few days. After that, you can deal with your relationship affairs. When Linhan is in T-City now, he won't lose his face. What are you afraid of?" "I'm not afraid of losing his face. Don't explain. I don't want to hear any explanation now. I know you just said you would go with me. Don't go back on your words. Get in the car now." Wen Liqing hesitated for a moment, but she still walked forward, sat in the car, and then gathered her clothes. The senior brother also got into the driver's seat. When he closed the door, it was very quiet in the car, and only the breathing of the two people could be heard. He didn't drive immediately but sat in the car for a while. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, "You once said that Wen Linhan is a very good brother. Whether you thought you were biological brother or sister or later found out that you were not related by blood, he is as good to you as ever. Like all the elders in the family, he loves you as the apple of his eye." Wen Liqing lowered her eyes and said in a muffled voice, "Yes. So he keeps saying that you are just his sister and will not surpass this relationship at all. Then why did he suddenly fly to T-City and why did he treat you like this today? Wen Liqing didn't speak anymore. The senior brother started the engine and drove the car away. After driving the car away, he said indifferently, I think it is you who should be calmer. You have never understood Wen Linhan. Even if you grew up with him, you have never seen his true face. True face? What true face? Wen Liqing turned to look at him, but the senior brother just drove and didn't say anything, but his face was not very good. Obviously he didn't enjoy the punches just now. It was rare that Wen Linhan just lay there to be beaten. He should have punched him a few more times. When she woke up in the morning, she habitually wanted to call Ji Nuan and ask if she needed to go to T University to accompany her. But thinking that Mr. Mo was in T-City now, it was unnecessary for him to go there. After all, the Cold War between the young couple had just ended, so he didn't make the call but lay in bed for a while. When she got up, she didn't know if Li Nanheng was awake. Instead of going to the bedroom next door to ask, she went downstairs to buy breakfast. It was just some external injuries and she would be fine as long as she walked slowly. She did not want to stay in the room alone. When he went to buy breakfast and walked back, he passed by a fitness area near the river opposite the hotel. He saw many people doing morning exercises there, and many young couples coming out for a walk early in the morning. It was a very harmonious and peaceful morning. It was said that this was a downtown area, and it was not allowed to set up stalls in such places. However, there was actually a stall set up early in the morning in front of them. Someone was selling all kinds of phone cases and stickers for this year's new mobile phones. Feng Ling thought of her new mobile phone. For her, a mobile phone was expensive as long as it cost more than 1,000 yuan. Such an expensive mobile phone should be well protected, so she walked over, chose a phone case that looked sturdy, and spent another 10 yuan to ask someone to help her stick a sticker on the screen of her mobile phone. The shells and membranes were very cheap. Although it was a small stall, since it could be placed in such a place and opened so early in the morning, the price would usually not be too cheap. However, the stall owner's asking price was really too cheap. It just happened to satisfy her desire to not spend money recklessly. She was playing with her mobile phone and was about to go back with the breakfast, when suddenly a couple who were taking a walk opposite her began to quarrel. The man, you also know that I will be angry? Every day you don't tell me what you are feeling and you don't tell me about your grievances. Do you take me as your man? The woman, it's not that I don't want to tell you. I just feel that there are some things that I can get through alone. I don't need to mention them to anyone. The man, have you ever thought about me? I am your boyfriend. Shouldn't you let me comfort you when you feel wronged? Let's not talk about how to solve the problem first. One more person is always one more helper. At least when you want to get through it, let me know that at least I can be by your side. Do you really put me in your heart? Do you really love me? The woman, I don't know. The man, from the beginning when we were together there were so many things that you cared about, but you never really considered the simplest link between us. You have been antisocial since you were young. Now that there is finally someone who is willing to dote on you and is willing to wait for you to accompany you, you still reject me thousands of miles away. I really have enough of you. Let's break up. The woman, listen to my explanation. The man, there is nothing to explain. You are not honest enough when it comes to feelings. I'm your man, but when you needed help the most, you never thought that I could be your backer. I'm not in your eyes at all. What else is there to explain? It's just that you don't love me enough. The woman, I am not. Just like that, the young couple pulled each other and quarreled as they walked away. Feng Ling stood where she was, holding her phone and falling into a state of absent-mindedness. The location of this outdoor fitness area by the river was directly opposite the hotel across the road. At the window of the hotel, Li Nanheng slowly looked at the little woman who was standing there in a daze. He took off the remote earphones, picked up his cell phone, and dialed a series of numbers. After the call was connected, he said mildly, "These two people's acting skills are stiff and their lines are ordinary. If it were anyone else, they would be able to tell at a glance that this is a lousy quarrel. Only Feng Ling, who has never seen others act, didn't see any flaws. Where did you find these actors?" The little couple, who were about to end their acting, suddenly received unsatisfactory feedback from the boss. Fearing that their money would be deducted, they hurriedly walked back along the original path while quarreling. When they passed by Feng Ling, the woman accidentally bumped into the breakfast in Feng Ling's hand and turned back to apologize to Feng Ling. "Feng Ling, it's okay." She took a step back and was about to leave this place. In the end, the young couple suddenly pushed and shoved each other to the side of the road under a tree. The man directly pressed the woman against the tree, imprisoning her between his arms and the tree. In a low and expressionless voice he said, "Why do you think I'm angry? It is because I love you. It is because I love you that I am willing to bear everything for you and bear all the burdens for you. You have always been so stubborn. Do you want to continue to be alone and helpless for the rest of your life? I am willing to be your support. What about you? When will you open your body and mind and let me hug you?" Chapter 11:19. Li Nanheng, who was in the hotel window, said lightly to the person on the other side of the remote earpiece, "More money." Hearing the moneymaker say so, the two people who were leaning against the tree acted even more and said all kinds of touching words from the bottom of their hearts. Feng Ling was a little puzzled and her heart trembled. She thought of everything that had happened to her and what Li Nanheng had done for her. She carried the breakfast that was about to turn cold in her hand and quickly walked across the road back to the hotel. When she entered the room, she saw Li Nanheng standing in the living room with a cup of coffee in his hand. He glanced at her with a sleepy expression and was about to walk into the bedroom silently. Feng Ling pursed her lips and walked in. "Don't sleep. Have breakfast." The man paused and turned to look at her back, who had already walked to the table. "What breakfast?" Feng Ling put the breakfast on the table. Her voice was flat, but it was less cold than a few days ago. Steamed buns, fried dough sticks, soy milk, porridge and a box of side dishes. Hearing that she was a little conscientious and no longer rejected him, Li Nanheng quietly turned and threw the coffee cup back into the kitchen. He then turned back to the table and was about to sit down to eat when Feng Ling glanced at him. "Didn't you just get up? Don't you want to wash up before eating?" Li Nanheng. He got up, turned back to the bedroom and began to wash up for the second time today. When the man brushed his teeth and came out, Feng Ling had already finished her share. When he sat down, she was about to get up, but the man pushed the soy milk in his hand to her. "I don't drink this. Help me drink it." Feng Ling looked at him. "I don't have such a big stomach." Li Nanheng glanced at the lunch box in front of her. "You put 2 steamed buns and 2 fried dough sticks here for me, but you only ate 1 fried dough stick and a cup of soy milk. Are you eating cat food?" "Feng Ling, I'm not that hungry. I'll just eat a little." "Drink it." The man decisively pushed the soy milk to her. Feng Ling glanced at him and then at him. She saw that the man had already picked up the bun to eat. The way this man ate was very good looking. It was not overly pretentious and elegant, but it was also not wolfing down the food. In short, it was that kind of manly. She had no choice but to take the soy milk, insert the straw and drink 2 more mouthfuls. "What are you thinking about?" Li Nanheng looked at her as he ate, and there was a meaningful smile in his eyes. "When I woke up, I didn't notice that you went out. You, an injured person, ran out to buy breakfast. Have I trained you to be too independent over the years? You don't even give others a chance to enjoy being relied on." Feng Ling only drank the soy milk and did not speak. She then thought of the young couple she had just seen downstairs arguing. She was the same as that girl. She was too used to keeping everything to herself. She was used to not bothering others. Even if something really happened, she would keep it to herself. She was unwilling to say a word to others. However, if a person was willing to do anything for her and bear everything for her, but she often rejected him because of various reasons, wasn't she really too much? Li Nanheng did not express his dissatisfaction and anger like that man, but that time he whispered in her ear and asked her to remember what she said. Later, all kinds of indifference and brushing past him showed that he was really angry. What was he angry about? Was he angry that she didn't understand his heart? "I got up early and couldn't sleep, so I went downstairs for a walk and bought breakfast on the way." "It's not as complicated as you think," Feng Ling said lightly, but she looked at the man who was eating. She glanced at the man who was eating. After holding it in for a long while, she finally asked, "Is it delicious?" It was the first time in a long time that he heard Feng Ling take the initiative to ask something, even if it was just 3 short words. The smile in Li Nanheng's eyes instantly deepened. He took a bite of half of the bun, chewed, swallowed it and laughed loudly. "It's delicious." Feng Ling. Why did others say that Li Nanheng was so cold in front of them, but when she looked at him, she always felt that this man was like a fool. If it was delicious, then it was delicious. Why did he smile? The point was that when he smiled, he looked at her while smiling, as if it was not a bun but a golden pimple. Feng Ling didn't look at him anymore and continued to drink her soy milk. But at this time she glanced at the fitness area by the river opposite the hotel, took a look and then suddenly turned to look in that direction, and at the same time looked at her cell phone on the table. It was strange. When she was downstairs just now, there were people selling things there so early in the morning. How long had it been? Why did the stall disappear? Was it sold out? No, there were still a lot of people just now, and it was so early now. Few people would buy things, so it couldn't be sold so quickly. It hadn't even been half an hour and the stall was already gone? Feng Ling looked in that direction thoughtfully. Li Nanheng also looked in that direction because of her gaze. Noticing what Feng Ling was looking at, he suddenly coughed and raised his hand to say, "Give me the soy milk. I'm choking." Feng Ling hadn't come back to herself. She only turned to look at him, saw that the man seemed to be really choked, and subconsciously hurriedly handed him the unfinished soy milk in her hand. She saw that the man took her soy milk and took a big sip with the straw she had just used. When she realized that the straw was used by her, the man had already taken several sips. Feng Ling's attention was also completely attracted by the straw. She put on a sullen expression, thinking that she had been kissed by him before, and it was not a big deal to use the same straw. When they were all men in the base, they also used the same cup, so it was not so pretentious. But now, no matter how she looked at it, she felt that it was too intimate and ambiguous, and he didn't treat her as an outsider. However, she didn't say this, but when the man returned the soy milk to her again, she hesitated. If she didn't drink it, it would be too delicate and wasteful. There was still half a cup. If she drank it, it seemed, after hesitating for a while, she still lowered her head and continued to drink, but this time she lowered her head even more, as if afraid that the man would see her somewhat hesitant expression. Glancing at her unscrupulous but somewhat hesitant expression, Li Nanheng held back his laughter, glanced at the phone she had just changed to the novice case and smiled without a trace. "Where did you buy this breakfast? Tastes good. I'll buy 2 more tomorrow morning." The man tried to find something to talk about. Feng Ling lowered her head and said, "No need. I know which store it is. I'll go buy it tomorrow." Chapter 11:20. Li Nanheng's smile widened when he heard that she would continue to stay here and help him buy breakfast the next morning. "With your injury, are you sure you can walk that far?" "It's not that far. I'll buy breakfast in the morning and take in some fresh air. It's good for the body." Feng Ling was still drinking her soy milk and did not notice that the man was grinning from ear to ear. "All right then, thank you for your hard work, Miss Feng." Feng Ling paused and suddenly looked up at him. The man's expression had returned to normal. When she looked up, he met her gaze calmly. Feng Ling was speechless. Why did she feel that something was wrong? But she could not tell what was wrong. The next day, Feng Ling went to buy breakfast on time. When she passed by the area by the river, she saw a small stall selling things. However, it was not as lively as it was yesterday, and there were not as many couples coming and going. That night, because Feng Ling had been injured for 2 or 3 days, she could apply the medicine herself most of the time and did not need to trouble Li Nanheng. She insisted on doing it herself, and Li Nanheng did not force her to do anything. Therefore, by the time she sat on the bed with the medical kit and applied the medicine, it was already very late. When Liqing called, "Feng Ling, how have you been recently?" Hearing that Wen Liqing's voice was a little hoarse, Feng Ling said with concern, "I'm fine, it's nothing. I just suffered some superficial wounds a few days ago. I was afraid that you would be worried, so I didn't tell you. Now the wounds are basically healed." "Injured?" Wen Liqing raised her voice. "Where are you?" When Feng Ling went downstairs today, she paid special attention to the surroundings and the name of the hotel. "A hotel near the river in the city. I think it's called the Golden City Hotel. I'll visit you tomorrow." "No need, what's wrong with your throat?" "Nothing, I haven't slept well for the past 2 days. In addition, there was a lecture at the medical school today. I sat there with a few of my seniors and talked for the whole day, so my throat is a little hoarse." Feng Ling instinctively felt that Wen Liqing's low spirits had something to do with Dr. Wen, but she did not ask too much. "Feng Ling, do you still plan to go back to America? The United States?" "I've never thought about it. I don't have any friends anywhere, so I'll just work wherever there's a suitable job for me. Mrs. Mo's place isn't a long-term place. As long as the crisis is over, I'll definitely leave. Which normal person would have a bodyguard by their side all the time? It's too redundant." She didn't have a fixed residence. Originally, it didn't matter where she went. She had never thought about where she had to go or where she had to stay. "I plan to travel around the world after my speech in the city ends. If you have time, why don't we go together? All over the world?" "I heard that the countries around the world aren't as peaceful as they seem. Many Western countries are affected by the chaos of war. If you really want to go out, you'd better make a safety plan first. Why are you like my brother? You're so concerned about the safety of others." "I'll look for you tomorrow. You've been staying in that hotel recently, right? Okay, give me a call before you arrive." Before hanging up the phone, Feng Ling comforted Wen Liqing with a few words, lest Wen Liqing's slightly depressed mood continue. When she put down the phone, she suddenly raised her eyes and looked at the man who was standing in front of her bedroom door. She was shocked. She was so alert that she didn't even notice when Li Nanheng entered the door. Sure enough, the only person in the world who could make her lose her alertness and come and go without a trace was Li Nanheng. You didn't even knock before coming in? I was about to knock, but I heard you talking on the phone, so I didn't want to disturb you. Feng Ling adjusted her pajamas. Because she had just changed her dressing, a few buttons of her pajamas were still undone, revealing more than half of her shoulder. She adjusted her pajamas without batting an eyelid. It's already so late. Why are you looking for me? Li Nanheng did not enter. He was still leaning against the door frame. Wen Liqing wants to go out for a walk and wants to bring you along? Yes. He smiled. You haven't been out before. At most, you've been to 2 or 3 places when you were on missions, and most of the time, you were with the people in the base. How do you know that there are so many unknown dangers out there? You're usually so arrogant, but now you know how to persuade Wen Liqing not to wander around and scare her with all kinds of dangerous words about war-torn countries. You don't want her to go too far, so you want her to stay and continue to create opportunities with Dr. Wen, right? Feng Ling, I didn't think so much. Li Nanheng's cold brows moved slightly. I've never heard you speak so gently to anyone. You're so patient and comforting and coaxing. It seems that you have a good relationship with Wen Liqing. As he spoke, the man stood up straight and strode towards her. Feng Ling saw him approaching and suddenly did not know where to put her hands. She subconsciously touched the medical kit beside her. What are you doing? She paused and said, Li Nanheng, it's very late now. Why aren't you busy with your own things or resting in the bedroom? Why are you here? The man stood in front of her, bent down, and leaned over little by little. Feng Ling's hand clenched on the medical box. She was not forced to retreat by his aura, but her eyes were obviously a little guarded. His breath came closer and brushed through her pores. Her nose was full of the man's scent. She still remembered the conversation she heard from the young couple yesterday morning. I like you and love you, so I'm willing to take on everything for you. When will you really open yourself up and accept the thousands of good things that a person can do for you? When she came back to her senses, the man was only a finger away from her. He stopped moving. She looked at him and her eyelids twitched. Miss Feng. What? She was really uncomfortable with the words, Miss Feng. She felt that every time this man called her these 3 words, it was as if he had bad intentions. Li Nanheng laughed hoarsely. If I was the one who drove by in time to save you when you fainted at the base, would you treat me like how you treated Wen Liqing? How would I treat her? Gentleness, patience. You're already willing to let go of your true self to the point that you're close to a friend. If it were me, would you give your entire self to me and give it to me without any worries? Chapter 11:21. Feng Ling felt that this assumption was not valid. The man was very close to her. Right now, she really wanted to retreat and distance herself from him. However, she knew that if she retreated now, it would mean that she had been defeated by his words. It would mean that she really cared about something with him. There's no ifs. I'm very grateful to Miss Wen for extending a helping hand back then, so it's only natural that I can open my heart to her now. Feng Ling turned her face away slightly to avoid being kissed by him. However, she felt that she was actually about to be kissed. Although their skin had clearly not really touched, the man's breathing and hoarse voice gave her the illusion that he had already kissed her from head to toe. Aside from that one time when I was locked in the Li family's ancestral hall and couldn't appear in time, when have I not appeared in time? Why don't you try opening your heart to me for once? Feng Ling closed her eyes. I have. She closed her eyes and tried her best to speak in a rational voice. Li Nanheng, I have. He stood up straight again. She finally opened her eyes and raised her head to look at him. There was no anger, displeasure, or any chagrin on the man's face. He only placed one hand in his trouser pocket and looked at her warmly. In the relationship between people, there is a saying that has been circulating for a long time that I have always felt is rather pretentious. Using 100 steps to describe a pair of people in love, I took 99 steps in your direction and finally, you took the most important step toward me. However, you only took half of this step. Because of your distrust, your hesitation, your lack of confidence, and various other reasons, you took back this step and retreated countless times. It's not that we can't be together, but there are too many things written in your heart that can't be. Feng Ling's complexion was slightly pale because the man had suddenly calmly analyzed all of her timidity and lack of confidence. because he had brazenly exposed all of her hidden emotions. She heard her overly fast heartbeat and felt that her breathing was a little short of oxygen. She had indeed taken a step forward and had indeed opened her heart to him. However, it seemed that she had only tentatively and carefully taken a step forward before being frightened back. If it was someone else, she probably wouldn't even take this step. At this moment, the man suddenly bent his head down again. This time he seemed to be determined to let her know something. Suddenly he wrapped his arms around her sides and trapped her on the bed. Even though Feng Ling did not fall down, she still sat there stiffly, watching the man in front of her. "Look into my eyes, Feng Ling." She looked into his eyes. "I don't have any other woman. From the beginning to the end, I've only had you. Give yourself a little more confidence. Don't always be like a mouse that sees a cat and runs away at the slightest movement." As he spoke, the man chuckled. "I've used up all my patience on you. You have to give me a response, don't you? I don't know what to do. I'll teach you." The man leaned closer and raised a hand to point at his face. "Kiss me. Again?" Feng Ling. She grabbed the pillow by her hand and smashed it hard against his face. At the same time, she pressed his face hard and didn't stop until the man was pushed far away. He didn't force her to kiss him. He just smiled and held the pillow in his hand. Looking at the short-haired little woman sitting on the bed who didn't know what to do and looking at her expression, he chuckled. "Is Wen Liqing coming to see you?" "And tomorrow. In the next 2 days, I'll be attending some activities related to the Li Corporation's domestic partners. There's also a banquet. Do you want to attend?" "Banquet? Do you want me to attend as your bodyguard?" Feng Ling asked. He raised his eyebrows high. "What do you think?" Feng Ling didn't want to say it. She pointed to the door and said, "It's too late. I'm going to sleep. Go out." The man wasn't annoyed at all. With one hand in his trouser pocket, he looked at her from the side. It wasn't until the little woman was about to explode from his stare that he walked out with a chuckle. "Good night." The man switched on the main light in the bedroom, leaving only a dim yellow wall lamp by the bedside. "Li Nanheng." When the door was about to be closed, Feng Ling suddenly called him. He paused. "I grew up drinking wolf's milk. I'm not feminine at all. I'm not reasonable either. Why do you like me?" "Indeed, I'm not reasonable enough. I don't King know why I like you." Feng Ling, "Oh." Hearing the little woman's muffled voice under the quilt, Li Nanheng put one hand on the door frame and glanced at her. "Miss Feng. Speak. Do you need me to bring a knife over right now? You can dig out my heart and see if it's carved with the words little wolf girl, you heartless bastard?" Feng Ling pulled the quilt over her face and said in a muffled voice, "Go out. Don't talk so bloody. I don't want to have nightmares. Good night." The smile on the man's lips deepened. Sweet dreams. When Liqing came to find her the next afternoon. Because Feng Ling said that she hadn't eaten at noon, when Liqing happened to be hungry, so she took a taxi to come over. She rang the doorbell several times outside the room and waited quietly. Suddenly she heard footsteps. She turned to see that Feng Ling had come back from outside. It seemed that she had just gone out to buy something. Feng Ling was only in her early 20s. The young girl's facial features were cold and beautiful, but also had an unusual beauty. Her short hair was not dried or styled after taking a shower in the morning, and the light black hair color made her skin look even fairer. Feng Ling didn't seem to have put on makeup or dyed her hair. She stood there looking completely plain and clean, making people feel particularly comfortable. At this moment, Feng Ling was wearing a black turtleneck knitted sweater, a thin white outer shirt, and a pair of black flat boots that looked somewhat androgynous. She didn't wear any accessories from head to toe, and she didn't even wear a watch on her wrist. She was holding a beige handbag in her hand, which seemed to contain the things she had just bought. From a distance, it seemed to be just some daily necessities. Feng Ling's temperament had always been indifferent and cold. In the past, when she was in the base, she wore black uniforms with everyone else. When she was not in the base, she usually wore loose clothes that were slightly neutral, but even so, it could not contain the indifferent and cold aura that she exuded from her bones that kept people away. Chapter 11:22. This Feng Ling was very beautiful, but she was cold. Her eyes and brows were gentle, but she didn't look gentle at all. Her temperament was so cold that people couldn't help looking at her. There were so many contradictions in her, but she didn't seem to be out of place. Feng Ling came up. "I just went down to buy something. I thought you would wait a while." With that she opened the door. "Miss Wen, come in." Wen Liqing walked in, put down her bag and took the slippers that Feng Ling handed to her. While changing her shoes, she looked inside casually and said, "Feng Ling, you don't live here alone, do you? I haven't asked much about you recently because of my own affairs. I don't know when you moved out of my house, nor when you came to this hotel." Feng Ling paused. "I moved in a few days ago. Several old enemies who chased me when I was on a mission in the United States found me, but fortunately they were not seriously injured." Wen Liqing changed her shoes and walked in quickly. When she was about to take Feng Ling's arm, she felt that Feng Ling stiffened slightly. She realized that Feng Ling's arm was also injured, so she softened her movements. "Where are your injuries? Let me see?" "No need. They're almost healed. I'm a doctor. Let me take a look. Only when I know what's going on will I feel at ease." Hearing her say so, Feng Ling didn't stop her. Wen Liqing opened her clothes and pants to check her injuries and then looked at the almost invisible strangulation mark on her neck, and she nodded. "Sure enough, it's just a superficial wound. Those people dare to run amok in the United States, but they shouldn't be so bold here. It's not easy to transport guns here. Otherwise, if they really chased me, I don't know what would happen." And indeed. Wen Liqing walked a few steps in this large room, looked around and said, "This room is too big. It should be the best business suite in this hotel. There are more than 2 or 3 bedrooms, which is larger than the space of ordinary residential families. Even if you are not short of money, you shouldn't come out to live in such a room. And I think..." She glanced at a pair of gray men's shoes at the door. "Here, there should be another man living with you, right?" "Feng Ling, I thought you knew." Wen Liqing stopped and turned to look at her. "What do I know? Does he know which man you are with? How would I know? I can't even take care of myself these past few days. I'm only staying here temporarily to recuperate from my injuries. Moreover, I'm currently being hunted by someone, so it's indeed more suitable for me to stay with him. Otherwise, it'll be easy to implicate others. Besides, there are so many bedrooms here. It's not a big deal if we all live in our own rooms." "Who is that man? Do I know him?" In fact, Wen Liqing was not too surprised that Feng Ling had a man by her side to take care of her. After all, although Feng Ling's personality was a little cold, many men liked this kind of silent, aloof and uncontrollable woman. For them, such a woman was more challenging. In the past, she had seen many male colleagues or friends around her, who had been bleeding in pursuit of a high mountain flower, saying that they liked this kind of personality. Feng Ling's personality was very quiet, but especially outstanding. Not to mention men would like her, even the same sex would not hate her. Li Nanheng. Wen Liqing thought of many possibilities, but the only one she didn't expect was Li Nanheng, who was 1,000 miles away from Feng Ling. "Feng Ling, between you and Nanheng." She looked at Feng Ling and asked, "Is there any result between you and Nanheng? For so many years, we have been entangled with each other for a long time, and he has always been very concerned about you. As for the matter with the Feng family, he has never mentioned it in the past 3 years. At that time it was just a piece of news in the media. There has never been any other woman by Nanheng's side, so in fact, we are also very suspicious about whether he was married at that time, and Nanheng has never explained it to us. I just don't know if he has explained it to you or not." Feng Ling turned to look at her. He really explained it to her more than once. Had there really never been any other woman by his side? If he was really married, it was impossible that no woman had ever appeared by his side, not to mention that Nanheng usually came and went to the base. There were so many people and there were so many people. If there was really a woman, the so-called Mrs. Li, it must have been seen by others. However, it seemed that it was really as Nanheng said. He didn't have any other woman. Feng Ling, Los Angeles is not a small place. If the news that was uploaded by the media was false, the Feng and Li family should have long refuted the rumors. Whether it is true or false, there is no need to pursue it. Why is there no need to pursue it? If Nanheng really hasn't married any other woman, it means that you have misunderstood him all these years. It means that the two of you have been delayed for 3 whole years. Now that the truth is out, shouldn't you rush back into his arms and live a loving life with him? Look, there is a little problem with you and Nanheng has been watching over you. Where can you find such a man? Don't make it so complicated. This time I only have a superficial wound. He doesn't want me to be alone outside, so he asked me to stay here. It's not what you think." Wen Liqing looked at her as though she was looking at a melon. "Can you tell me, have you ever been serious about Nanheng?" Feng Ling was silent for a while and did not answer. It was not until Wen Liqing came over and stared directly into her eyes as though trying to see through her that Feng Ling answered in a low voice, "Yes." Wen Liqing instantly smiled. Recently, because of her brother, she had not smiled like this, but now she was in a good mood and said with a smile, "That's easy. In fact, he and I are too familiar with each other in the base." Perhaps at that time, because I was the only woman in the base, he had no other place to express his feelings, so he just made do with me. Wen Liqing. It was said that men's EQ was not as high as women's, and the words blockhead were often used to describe men. But now, these 4 words were really appropriate to describe Feng Ling. Make do with me? Do you want to say that you just made do with me? Maybe. Wen Liqing's eyelids twitched, and her eyes inadvertently swept at the person who suddenly pushed the door open. Chapter 11:23. Knowing that Feng Ling was deliberately being stubborn, Wen Liqing couldn't help sweating for her and subconsciously cleared her throat to remind Feng Ling to pay attention to her words. Feng Ling still looked at her calmly. There are so many men in the base. People like me who haven't developed feelings from the beginning are easily taken away by others. Perhaps if it were someone else who liked me and treated me well, I might have responded seriously. How is that possible? Xiao Fei should have told you before Boss Li did, right? Have you ever fallen in love with Xiao Fei? Wen Liqing said and winked at Feng Ling, reminding her that there was someone behind her. Feng Ling fell into deep thought and then answered seriously, "Maybe it's just because Boss Li is a little more handsome than Drill Master Qiao. Boss Li is sure to win." Wen Liqing squeezed out a smile. "Really? I think Xiao Fei is also very handsome." Please, Feng Ling, if you can say that Boss Li is more handsome, or even if you can say a few words to defend Boss Li on the matter of whether he is handsome or not, perhaps the situation will not be too serious. Don't be stubborn and court death." However, Feng Ling leaned against the coffee table and held her chin seriously with one hand. "Indeed, maybe if I had thought about it a little, maybe now I and Drill Master Qiao have already passed our 3-year anniversary." Wen Liqing smiled. If she didn't court death, she wouldn't have died. She really couldn't be saved. Speaking of which, in addition to Boss Li's handsome appearance and high status, he is nothing more than a devil who has bullied me in the base for many years. What on earth made me fall in love with him? Come to think of it, the last thing I should have done was... Wen Liqing suddenly stared at the direction behind Feng Ling and suddenly raised her voice. "Nanheng." Before Feng Ling finished speaking, she was about to say the second half of the sentence when her voice suddenly froze. She turned around and looked back. The man in a black shirt was standing quietly, unhurriedly rolling up the cuffs of his shirt. At the same time, he gave Wen Liqing a faint smile and greeted her in a normal tone. "Isn't your brother also in City C? Why does he have time to come here?" As he spoke, the man approached with his strong and slender legs, but his eyes did not look at Feng Ling. "You've been in C City for some time. When do you plan to return to America?" All the words were directed at Wen Liqing. "I've signed a contract with the medical school in the city. I have to stay there for at least 3 months before I can move." Wen Liqing felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, so she gestured to Feng Ling to explain quickly. When Li Nanheng walked past, he glanced at the coffee table. He seemed to be smiling politely, but his voice was indifferent. "Miss Wen, what would you like to drink? I see that your complexion is very ordinary." "Forget about the drinks, how about a cup of tea? There are all kinds of flower tea in this hotel. It's a good choice for ladies." "Anything is fine," Wen Liqing answered eagerly. 5 minutes later, Li Nanheng came over with 2 cups of high-quality roses and placed them on the coffee table in front of them. Wen Liqing quickly said, "Thank you." "You guys talk first, I'm going to change my clothes," the man said indifferently. All right. Wen Liqing felt that she had known Li Nanheng for so many years. They grew up together, but this was the first time she felt that she had to be so careful when talking to him, for fear of igniting the fire. Li Nanheng nodded and turned to go to the bedroom. It was not until the bedroom door opened and closed that Feng Ling looked at Wen Liqing silently. Wen Liqing was also helpless. She looked at Feng Ling's obviously deflated expression. "Now you know that you said something wrong? I've been reminding you just now. Why didn't you notice it?" "Feng Ling, I thought you just had a sore throat. You usually say that you are a very quick-witted person. Why do you become so slow when it comes to Li Nanheng?" Wen Liqing raised her hand to touch her forehead. "I think he is most likely angry. Think of a way to coax him. I originally wanted to talk to you because I was in a bad mood, but now I'm not in the mood to talk to you. Hurry up and solve your own problem." Wen Liqing directly left. She did not dare to drink the flower tea. She was afraid that Li Nanheng would directly poison her because of his expression. In the bedroom, the man had just taken off his shirt and was about to pick up the black t-shirt on the side to put it on. Feng Ling knocked on the door, but there was no response from the person inside. She simply pushed the door open and entered, only to see that the man was shirtless and was about to change his clothes. Seeing that he was not wearing any clothes, she hesitated. Originally she wanted to leave, but then she thought that it was not the first time she saw him, so there was nothing to avoid. However, she didn't know whether it was good to go in like this, so she stood in front of the door and hesitated. The man had just picked up the t-shirt and turned to look at her. "What's the matter?" Feng Ling pushed the door open and walked in. She tried her best to shift her gaze away from the man's perfect figure. She stared at his lowered profile and asked, "Are you angry?" "Why am I angry?" Feng Ling approached a little and asked tentatively, "Did you hear what I said to Miss Wen just now?" Her mood instantly sank a little. "I didn't mean that." Li Nanhing spread out the t-shirt in his hand, put it on his head and very quickly put on his clothes. At the same time, he turned to look at her indifferently. "What do you mean?" "What I said just now, I just said it casually, but what I thought in my heart is not what I expressed with my mouth." He nodded. "So what you're saying is that the only good thing about me is that my appearance is also fake and I have nothing good about me?" "No, are you really angry?" The man raised his eyebrows indifferently and glanced at her indifferently. He seemed to find her question very funny. "You're right. There are so many people in the base but only 2 people found out your gender. Perhaps as early as before me, if more people found out and more people pursued you, I would have nothing to do with it. This is the truth and there is nothing to be angry about." She was a little confused because of his words. She seemed to understand but also seemed to not understand. She felt as if he was mocking her for not treating him as the most special one at all. Instead, she said that she was being serious but she was just being passive. Everything that happened between the 2 of them was just a perfunctory brushing over. She wasn't really low in EQ. She looked at him and said awkwardly, "Don't be angry. I really didn't mean it that way." The man said unhurriedly, "I was the one who asked for it. I delayed your and Xiao Fei's 3rd anniversary." You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.